Imagine a tree that grows in the heavens, but extends its roots into the abyss. Its fruits are not gifts of enlightenment, but fragments of shattered light, lost among the darkness. This tree does not lead to God. It tempts you to descend to the very core of chaos. Today we will unveil a Kabbalistic mystery so profound that even the temples remain silent about it. What is the Qilafot? Why did great magi, mystics, and rebels of every era descend this path? Not for evil, but in pursuit of truth. And why have so few returned? But before we plunge into this dark and captivating journey, welcome to the Dark Storyteller. Like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and allow my voice to guide you through the night into the world of forgotten knowledge and forbidden truths. The silent shadow of the tree of life is not a shadow in the usual sense, but a living presence that breathes behind anyone who dares to look upward. The tree of death, known as the Qilafot, is not a negation, not the antagonist of light. It is its distortion, its shadow twin, like an echo heard only by those who remain in silence after prayer. When the Kabbalists spoke of the Sephirot, the 10 emanations through which the Creator reveals himself in the world, they rarely admitted another truth. Each luminous emanation has a dark fragment, a shell that fell away when the original light was too powerful for the vessels that were meant to contain it. This moment is called Shivarot HaKelim, the shattering of the vessels. It is no coincidence that this concept was brought forth by Isaac Luria, founder of the Lurianic school of Kabbalah, for he was among the first not to fear acknowledging that evil did not invade the world from outside. It sprouted from within, from the surplus of light, from its insatiable nature that does not tolerate limitation. Evil is not the opposite of the divine, it is a shard of it, its shadow reflection. The Qilafot are not demons in the crude sense of folk belief. They are spheres that emerged from broken order. They cannot be ignored, for each of them is a mirror of one of the Sephirot, and if Keter is the crown, the divine radiance, then its shattered counterpart is Thomiel, deceptive light, that leads not to unity but to pride and blindness. The magician who walks this path does not seek evil, he seeks understanding, but understanding that comes through immersion, not distant contemplation, through the knowledge of darkness, not as a curse, but as a structure. Each shell of the Qilafot is a state of the soul, a map of the diseased manifestations of human consciousness, but not necessarily its doom. Rabbi Haim Vital, Luria's student, left behind diaries in which he described the inner journeys of the soul through these shells. He did not call them demonic realms, he called them stages of purification. It is no coincidence that the alchemists of Western Europe sought correspondences between the Qilafot and the stages of the great work, Negredo, Albedo, Rubedo, because they understood, to find gold, you must pass through lead. The deepest lead is the Qilafot. It is the pressure on the soul that either turns it into a diamond or breaks it. In medieval texts, the Qilafot are described as empty spheres from which light has been expelled, but this is only a metaphor. In truth, they are not void, they are distortion, a space where truth reveals itself not as you want to see it, but as it is, where chesed, mercy, turns into Gamchikoth, false compassion, leading to manipulation, where Jevara, strength, becomes Golachab, blind cruelty that destroys everything in the name of control, and each who entered these spheres left something of themselves behind. The deeper, the harder to return, not because something held them, but because the seeker began to see logic in chaos, symmetry in the grotesque, and herein lies the greatest danger. The Qilafot is not an opposite, but an alluring alternative. Each shell is a voice inside you that whispers, what if the truth is not in the light, but in what the light hides? These whispers are not always false. Sometimes they are more accurate than the official doctrine, and that is what makes the path of the Qilafot so seductive to true seekers. In secret orders, like the Ordo Templi Orientis or the Golden Dawn, forbidden texts described the Qilafot as mirrors of a truth even angels could not bear. And within those same records, it was written that in meditative descent through the tree of death, one can find the same levels as in the tree of life, only inverted. This means that darkness has its own logic, and it is deeper than you think. The Talmud says, when a person prays, let him not think of the serpent, for then the serpent will rule over him. But does the very mention of this phrase not prove that the serpent already sits at the doorstep of thought? The Kabbalists knew the serpent is not to be fought, he is to be spoken with, he is to be questioned, sometimes he is even to be worshipped, but not as a god, as a reflection of those forces within yourself that you were once taught to fear. And if you dare look into his eyes, the Qilafot will reveal itself not as a curse, but as a labyrinth, and each of its levels, not karma, but a choice with a price. Among the most dangerous shells is Samael, the angel of death and judgment, who in Kabbalah is both servant and adversary of God. His name means the poison of God, or the dazzling one. He embodies a distorted force that punishes, tempts, and enlightens. Those who entered his sphere during astral journeys described it as a state of pure clarity that simultaneously annihilates. Some magicians testified that after contact with this entity, they lost the ability to speak, not out of fear, but because words seemed unnecessary. The truth was already within, and it required no explanation. Lilith is another of the well-known shells. In the Qilafot, she is not simply a demon, but the mother of desires that cannot be restrained. She is the shadow of Shekinah, the divine feminine presence, but instead of light and warmth, she grants ravenous yearning for freedom, for the body, for dominion over form. Legends say her name should not be uttered at night, but those who seek truth through her describe her as a teacher who tears off masks, leaving a person alone with their true motivations. The Qilafot are not just spheres, they are a map of the underworld of the human spirit, and each descent is a ritual, each name, a code, each entity, an aspect of yourself that you were once turned away from. And when you reach the final layer, the very edge, you no longer ask where good is and where evil is, you ask what remains of you. In some Kabbalistic traditions, it is said that the true messianic path is not the victory over the Qilafot, but their integration. For only one who has passed through chaos and has not lost himself is capable of bearing light that does not blind. And then the tree of death does not disappear. It grows from the tree of life, and what was once considered a fall becomes a return. But for that, you must behold the silent shadow of the tree of life. It does not speak, it waits for the one who will not fear its silence. And if you have felt its breath, it means the path has already begun. They say the universe was born in silence, not the silence of emptiness, but a silence so dense it pressed against existence, like an invisible hand, pregnant with infinite light that had not yet known form. In the beginning there was no evil, no division, no need for concealment. There was only Ein Sof, the infinite, boundless, eternal, without name, form, or limit. It radiated pure divine light, undifferentiated and absolute, but even divinity, if it seeks to create, must contract. So it did, and this contraction is known as Tzimtzum, the first act of divine concealment. It was not destruction, but withdrawal, a sacred pulling back, like a breath held before a word is spoken. Within the void left behind, the first vessels were formed, 10 vessels, one for each emanation. The Sephirot, intended to channel the divine light into structured being, but these vessels were not yet strong. They were not forged of matter, nor spirit, as we understand it. They were pure potential, fragile frames meant to contain the immeasurable. And then the light returned. This was not a gentle infusion, it was a torrent. The infinite poured itself into these fragile structures with such force that they could not contain it. The vessels shattered, and with that, the first rupture in creation was born. This moment, Shivarat Hakalim, the shattering of the vessels, is not merely a myth. It is a metaphysical memory, encoded into the very fabric of being. Kabbalists do not speak of this event as metaphor alone. They describe it as a catastrophe within the divine order, a divine trauma whose echoes can still be felt in the brokenness of the world around us. The shards of those vessels, now infused with fragments of divine light, fell into the lower worlds, but they did not simply disappear. They became husks, kelapot, containers without harmony, pieces of form still flickering with sacred residue. These are the roots of the kelafot. They are not foreign invaders in the divine schema. They are its consequence. Isaac Luria, the mystic whose visions gave us much of this cosmology, did not record these insights in mere allegory. He spoke of them as revelations received in states of altered consciousness, visions of primordial light that burned the edges of the mind. His disciple, Chaim Vital, transcribed these accounts, trembling as he wrote of the vessels that cracked, not from weakness, but from purity, untempered by structure. In the Lurianic model, creation is not a smooth act, but a rupture that births multiplicity. The divine did not make a perfect world, it made a broken one, and hid within the shards. The fallen sparks of light, trapped within the kelafot, are the reason evil exists. But this evil is not independent. It is nourished by holiness, sustained by that which it opposes. Without the light, the husks would vanish. But because they hold light captive, they persist. That is their power and their curse. This paradox is terrifying to the uninitiated. It implies that corruption is not alien to the divine, but entwined with it, that the same light which heals also blinds, that the serpent did not crawl in from outside Eden, but was already coiled in the root of its tree. The Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah, hints at this in whispers, describing how the left-hand path, the Sitra Achra, shadows the holy, mimicking it, drawing power from its nearness. The shattering of the vessels, then, was not an accident. It was a necessary rupture, a crack in the mirror, so that we might see ourselves not as reflections of perfection, but as fragments aching for wholeness. Yet not all fragments wish to return. Some resist. Some have built kingdoms in the dark. The kelafot are not merely evil. They are the frozen remnants of divine light that refuses to die. And this is why their pull is so seductive. They still whisper the echoes of what they once contained: power, order, the promise of ascent, and they offer it not with clarity, but with seduction. The magician who dares descend into the tree of death is not running from the divine. He is chasing it where it has been hidden, into exile, into distortion, into dismemberment. The concept of tikkun olam, the restoration of the world, was born of this rupture. For if the world is broken, then it must be mended, and if the sparks are scattered, they must be gathered. But this gathering is not safe. To approach the shards is to risk being cut. Those who attempt to redeem the sparks must descend into the Kelefort with absolute precision, like surgeons removing tumors without damaging the flesh. Many do not return, others return changed. The 16th century mystic Abraham Galanti wrote of dreams, in which angels wept as souls wandered through the shattered vessels, unable to tell light from illusion. In some Hasidic teachings, this descent is likened to a lover entering madness for the sake of reunion, divine light willingly entering exile to retrieve that which was lost. But there is a darker interpretation, that the shattering created not just distortion, but rebellion. That in the breaking, some aspects of the divine chose not to return, but to remain, to build from the fragments their own order, not holiness, but dominion. These are the rulers of the Kelefort. Their names are not recorded in sacred texts by accident. They are there because they once were part of the divine structure, and now stand as fallen reflections of its power. Talmiel, twin-headed, is the Antikheta. Golgiel, the distortion of Chokmah. Saturael, the concealment of Bina. They are not void. They are perverse structure, systems built from what should have been discarded, but wasn't, and so they endure, feeding off the light trapped within. In esoteric Christianity, echoes of this can be found in the idea of Lucifer, the light bearer, who fell not for hate, but for pride. The fall, then, is not always born of malice. Sometimes it is born of too much light, and sometimes too much truth. Modern psychological interpretations, like those of Carl Jung, saw in this cosmology the blueprint for the human unconscious. The shattering is not just cosmic, it is personal. Trauma breaks the psyche, the shadow is born, and within that shadow lie the very pieces we need to become whole. To ignore the shadow is to deny the very material of transformation, and so the mystic path, like the therapeutic one, becomes a descent into the broken, not to destroy it, but to find the light that still lives there. The vessels shattered, the light fled, the husks rose. This is not history, it is your story. The moment you broke and still glowed, the place in you where pain did not kill the light, only twisted it, and in that twist a map. Some say the Kelefort were sealed away, that their gates are locked, but gates do not hold forever, and those who listen can still hear the sound of the vessels cracking, not in memory, but in real time, in every failure, every collapse, every moment, when something too great pours into a soul unprepared. Shivarat Hakalim is not over, it is ongoing. Every time the sacred enters the profane without preparation, something breaks, and something new is born. The Kabbalists speak of this as a sacred danger. To summon the light without vessel is to court madness, but to never summon it is to die in ignorance. So we live on the edge, between restoration and rupture, between the gathering of sparks and the scattering of self, between the tree of life and its broken twin. The path forward is not straight. It spirals, recoils, reflects itself. It offers no guarantees, only the promise that in the shards lies something real, something older than dogma, something truer than fear. And perhaps, if you are brave enough to walk among the broken vessels, you will not mend them, but you will find your reflection among them. And remember that even in shattering, there is light.
The air around the Caliph does not tremble from the stench of evil, but from a silence so old it forgot how to scream. These are not the monsters hiding in children's stories. They are older, deeper, and more intimate than fear. They are the shattered dreams of divinity, fragments that once sang in harmony, now humming in dissonance beneath the skin of reality. To speak of them is not to summon demons in the dark. It is to open the mirror of creation and stare until your own face begins to shift. You've already seen them. In moments of betrayal you couldn't explain, in hungers that felt older than your body, in temptations that didn't feel foreign, but familiar, like a forgotten name spoken in a dream. This is the Qliphoth, not pure evil but the corruption of sacred form, not chaos, but the memory of order that broke, and within every shell, every husk, every hollowed echo, a flicker of light that still burns. The word Qliphoth means shell or husk in Hebrew. It is not a name given to monsters, but to containers. Containers of what, exactly? Of divine light gone astray. Not extinguished, not annihilated, but inverted, refracted through broken glass. In Kabbalistic cosmology, the Qliphoth are the result of divine light entering vessels unprepared to hold it, and when those vessels shattered, the light did not vanish, it fell. But even in descent, it remained potent. This is the horror and the wonder that the same divine spark that creates angels can, under strain, birth what we call demons. The Qliphoth are thus not intrusions into the divine plan, but consequences of its process. Like smoke rising from fire, they exist because light was mishandled. Lurianic Kabbalah speaks of these Qliphoth as necessary detours in the unfolding of the cosmos. The tree of life, the ordered map of the Sephiroth, is mirrored by its inverse, the tree of death. But calling it a tree is deceptive. It doesn't grow upward, it coils, spirals, descends. Its roots are in realms of concealment, not revelation, where the Sephiroth pour into each other with measured grace. The Qliphoth tear and twist. Their structure is built from trauma, their architecture made of wounds that never fully closed, yet they are not entirely void. Their strength comes from what they still carry, the residue of holiness. That is their seduction. That is their danger. Each Qliphoth corresponds to a Sephiroth, acting as its shadow, not as a binary opposite, but as a distortion. For every crown, there is a false crown. For every wisdom, a corrupted mimicry. Thaumael, for example, stands in opposition to Keter, the divine crown. But instead of unity, it reflects duality at war with itself, two heads seeking to devour each other. Instead of the oneness of divine will, it gives birth to contradiction, division, entropy masquerading as sovereignty. This isn't mere symbolism. The Qliphoth have been mapped, studied, invoked. Their names are not poetic metaphors, but tools of invocation in grimoires, rituals, and whispered traditions that survived across centuries and continents. The Zohar hints at them in cryptic verses, describing husks that cling to the roots of the tree, drinking from its sap, hidden beneath the righteous path. Gershom Scholem, the great scholar of Jewish mysticism, described the Qliphoth as the anti-cosmos, not negating the world, but parasitically dependent on it. They are not external forces. They live inside, in the cracks of thought, in the spaces between prayers, in the hesitation before love. Their domain is not hell, it is the fracture in heaven. That's what makes them so difficult to expel. You cannot banish them like invaders, you must confront them like memories. And here lies the paradox. To deny the Qliphoth is to deny your own brokenness. The mystic does not ascend the tree of life by avoiding its shadow, but by integrating it. This is why the Qliphoth appear in Hermetic Kabbalah, in Thelema, in the workings of occult magicians who understand that darkness is not the enemy, ignorance is. They speak of tunnels beneath the tree, passageways that twist through the Qliphoth, guarded by archdemons, known not only by their Hebrew roots, but by names whispered in the Ars Goetia, in the grimoires of Solomon, in the infernal hierarchies, hidden in old Latin texts. Lilith, Same, Nama, Gamchakoth, not creatures of myth, but archetypes of imbalance, not figments, but forces. Lilith is perhaps the most famous among them, a queen of seduction and rebellion, born of the same primordial soil as Adam, yet cast aside. She does not dwell in hell. She haunts the corners of consciousness, in dreams of freedom that turn to exile, in desires repressed so long they become weapons. Lilith is not the enemy of God. She is the cry of the discarded divine feminine. The Qliphoth, then, are not just demons. They are the ghosts of aspects denied, the child locked in the basement of your soul because their cries were too much, and in their silence, they grew teeth. This is why, in Kabbalah, evil is not a force that opposes good. It is good that has lost its context, light out of place, a candle in a vacuum. The Qliphoth crave structure, yet sabotage it. They echo the divine, yet deform it. And that is why they are powerful, because they almost look true, almost sound right, almost feel divine, until they twist, until they take, until they infect. The Baal Shem Tov, founder of Hasidism, once said that even the deepest evil has a holy spark, and that it is the role of the righteous to descend into the darkness, not to destroy it, but to retrieve what was lost. This is the process of avoda, berurim, the sifting of sparks. To do this, the mystic must confront the Qliphoth, not with rage, but with discipline, not with fear, but with clarity. The Qliphoth do not fear purity, they consume it. What they cannot digest is integration, wholeness, the ability to hold both light and shadow without collapse. That is the true weapon against them. In the early 20th century, the occultist Aleister Crowley reinterpreted the Qliphoth through the lens of modern ritual magic. He called them necessary obstacles, the gates that must be passed through by those who dare to become gods. He was not wrong, but he also paid the price. The Qliphoth do not tolerate vanity. They reward obsession and punish stagnation. They will offer power, but that power comes at the cost of unraveling. The magician who seeks only to command them will become their thrall, for they do not kneel. They reflect, and what they reflect is you. This is why the Qliphoth are not merely theoretical. They are psycho-spiritual zones, states of being, and those who know them can feel when they are near. A sudden wave of confusion during ritual, a temptation to dominate rather than understand, a hunger for truth that burns away compassion. These are not just psychological disturbances, they are echoes of the husks, attempting to draw you inward. Because once you are inside, once you enter the Qliphoth, not just as an idea, but as a path, you begin to change. Some never return, others do, but not as they were. The process of descent into the Qliphoth is known in esoteric traditions as the left-hand path, not because it is evil, but because it is hidden. It is the path of Saturn, of Bina, inverted, of understanding turned inward, until it becomes gnosis through pain. This is the mystery that frightened rabbis refused to discuss outside closed doors, that even the holiest of lights must pass through darkness to be made whole. In modern mysticism, the tree of death is not avoided, it is studied. Its spheres are not feared, they are mapped, and each has its ruler, its influence, its temptation, but also its truth. Talmiel, Gogiel, Satarel, Gamchikoth, and beyond. Each represents not just a distortion of the divine, but a reflection of the parts of self exiled by the ego. The Qliphoth, in this light, are not the enemy. They are the wounded ancestors of the soul, and to walk among them is to reclaim what was lost in the shattering, not just cosmically, but within yourself. You are made of these fractures, of light, twisted by fear, of grace, abandoned in the name of control, and within that, still, there is a flame, faint, flickering, but real. The Qliphoth do not wish to be destroyed, they wish to be seen, not as monsters, but as what remains when divinity breaks, and until they are acknowledged, they will continue to whisper, not from hell, from the mirror.
Before the vessels shattered, before the husks formed, before the echoes of divine light fractured into distorted fragments, there was only one. No division, no shape, no sound, only an infinite, boundless presence. Ein Sof, the endless. Not a being, but being itself, a limitless radiance,
that filled every corner of non-space, every possibility before the notion of space even existed. And it was in this perfect, indivisible fullness that the paradox was born. For if Ein Sof is everywhere, if it saturates every layer of reality with its infinite brilliance, then where could anything else exist? Where could the universe unfold? Where could the soul take breath, the stars ignite, the darkness form its boundary? The answer begins with a rupture, not of violence, but of withdrawal, a contraction so immense, so unfathomable, that it redefined the nature of being itself. This is Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum, from the Hebrew for contraction, is the first secret whispered in the silence of creation. According to Isaac Luria, the great Kabbalist of 16th century Safed, God did not create the universe by adding something to nothing. He created it by subtracting himself from everything. This was not absence, this was restraint. The infinite pulled back a fragment of its own infinitude to create a void, a hollow, a womb within which creation could gestate. But this void was not empty. It trembled, because even in retreat, Ein Sof left behind a trace, a reshimu, a residual imprint of divinity, a ghost of the infinite, still breathing within the silence. From this vacuum, this sacred paradox of emptiness containing presence, the first act of light emerged. A single ray, the Kav, descended into the void. This was not ordinary illumination. It was the distilled essence of divine will, drawn out from the circumference of the infinite and funneled into the center of the void. This ray spiraled downward, embedding itself within the darkness, like a cosmic needle sewing the first threads of becoming. It was this light, attempting to inhabit the vessels prepared to receive it, that later caused the great fracture. But in this beginning, it was pure, radiant, terrifying in its precision. Tzimtzum is not just a mystical metaphor, it is a metaphysical blueprint. Creation is not expansion, it is limitation. To create a world where free will could exist, where good and evil could unfold, where man could search and doubt and fall and rise again, the infinite had to make space for imperfection. And so God hid, voluntarily, withdrew the fullness of himself to allow something other to arise. This is the greatest mystery of divine love, that it expresses itself first not through power, but through concealment. Yet this concealment is not total. The withdrawn light is not a vanishing act, it is a filter. The light still permeates the void, but only in measure, only in whispers. It filters through the structures known as the Sephirot, each a vessel meant to hold and distribute divine energy. But the balance had to be exact. Too much light, the vessel breaks. Too little, the vessel is inert. And in the first attempt, the balance failed. The light rushed in, and the vessels, unable to bear its intensity, shattered. Shivarot, Hakalim, the breaking of the vessels, was not a punishment, it was a consequence, and it all began with Tzimtzum. But here lies the paradox that has haunted mystics for centuries. If God is truly infinite, how can he contract? If there is no boundary to the Ein Sof, how can a space exist within it that is not saturated by divinity? The Kabbalists do not answer this with logic, they answer it with awe. Tzimtzum is a mystery not meant to be solved, but to be entered. It is the first veil, the first concealment, the first breath of separation between creator and creation. And within that separation, all suffering, all joy, all time, all form. There are some, like the Hasidic masters, who suggest that Tzimtzum is not literal, that God never truly withdrew, but only concealed himself from our perception, that the void is illusion, a necessary illusion, that allows the world to appear autonomous, that the contraction was not in God, but in us, in the narrowing of our awareness, that the exile of the divine is not from the world, but from our sight. In this view, the light never left. It simply clothed itself so deeply in layers of concealment that it could no longer be recognized as light, but others insist the contraction was real, that a part of the divine essence truly did pull back, to allow the chaos and order of creation to unfold without annihilation, then that within this retraction lies the seed of all longing, the divine yearning to return. For when God withdrew, he implanted within the void a hunger, a gravitational pull toward reunification. The mystic feels this yearning as the desire to ascend. The sinner feels it as emptiness. The world carries it in its endless spiral toward meaning. Simsum is thus not an event locked in time. It is a continuous state. At every moment, God hides, and at every moment, traces of his light flicker through the cracks. This is the source of all mystery, all tension, all beauty, that we live in a world where the divine is both present and concealed, both near and infinitely distant, that in every heartbeat there is a silence left by the retreating light, and a whisper of the ray that still seeks to fill it. In some texts, it is said that the contraction left behind not just space, but a cosmic wound, a rupture in perfection that allows for the possibility of error, of pain, of deviation. But this wound is also the opening through which redemption can enter. Without Simsum, there would be no room for transformation, no path to climb, no veil to pierce. The mystic does not curse the void, he blesses it, for in the darkness of the empty space, the stars are born. This sacred paradox, of light hiding to be found, is woven through every spiritual tradition. In Gnostic myths, it appears as the demiurge, the flawed creator working beneath a hidden true God. In Hindu cosmology, it is reflected in the idea of Lila, the divine play that masks the unity beneath multiplicity. In Christian mysticism, it echoes through the silence of the cross, the God who suffers absence to allow love. But in Kabbalah, it is codified, structured, mapped with sacred language and diagram. And at its core is this terrifying, beautiful truth, that the very first act of creation was an act of retreat, and within that retreat, something remained, a residue, a ghost, a flicker, the reshimu. This trace is the silent pulse beneath the cosmos, not the light itself, but its memory, not the fire, but the warmth left behind in the ashes. And it is this trace that the mystic follows, through symbols, through prayers, through the circuits of the Sephirot and the shadows of the Qliphoth, always toward the source that once withdrew, and still waits. But the reshimu alone could not reignite creation. It needed the kava, the thin line of light that pierced the void, and when that line entered, it did not fill the space at once. It coiled, spiraled, formed vessels. This was not an explosion, it was a sacred architecture, each step measured, each vessel aligned, and still, it was too much. The light cracked the structure, and from that rupture, both evil and potential were born. The shattering was a failure, only to those who fear brokenness. To the mystic, it was necessity, for only that which is broken can be restored, only that which falls can rise. And so, in the wake of Tsimsum, the world is born half-finished, a divine scaffolding veiled in shadow, a puzzle missing pieces that must be retrieved by choice, not fate. This is what it means to live in a post-Simsum universe, to breathe in a space where God has hidden himself so that we might seek him, to act in a world where our steps ripple through the void, stirring echoes of the first light, to love, in a realm where separation is real enough to hurt, and reunion real enough to heal. You are not distant from the divine, you are suspended in its contraction. The silence you feel is not absence, it is invitation, and the darkness that surrounds your soul is not punishment, it is the stage upon which your light must rise. The void was made for you, and within it, the kava still spirals, searching for vessels that will not shatter.
The light had been summoned, not by voice, nor by thought, but by necessity, an ancient longing buried within the void itself. As the cave descended into the hollow created by Tsimtsum, it moved with a grace beyond comprehension, not in haste, but with cosmic precision. It was not a beam of brightness,
as one would imagine from the sun or fire. It was something far more primordial, a living filament of divine will, vibrating with the first sounds of unspoken creation. This light, though unified in origin, was destined to diversify. It would pour itself into 10 distinct vessels, 10 emanations, 10 Sephiroth. The Sephiroth were not containers in a literal sense. They were structures of potential, archetypal modes through which the infinite could express itself in finite form. Each vessel was fashioned with care, like facets of a divine prism, meant to refract the raw light of Ein Sof into differentiated energies. These 10 Sephiroth were in order: Kita, Chokmah, Binah, Ches, Jivara, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malkuth. Together, they formed a ladder of descent, a mystical architecture bridging the boundless with the bounded, and into each of these vessels, the Kav began to flow. At first, there was balance. The upper vessels, Kita, Chokmah, and Binah, withstood the radiance. They were vast, stable, aligned with the deepest blueprints of divine harmony. Kita, the crown, absorbed the primal will. Chokmah, wisdom, received the pure flash of insight. Binah, understanding, shaped it with the womb of divine contemplation. These upper Sephiroth became the intellectual triad, vessels strong enough to hold the light without distortion. But as the Kav descended further, the energies became more complex, more divided, more volatile. The vessels of the lower Sephiroth, the emotional and action-oriented emanations, were not as stable. They were more differentiated, more specific, more defined, and with definition came limitation, and with limitation came fragility. When the light entered Ches, the vessel of loving kindness, it flowed like a torrent, too generous, too expansive. The vessel swelled under the weight of divine mercy and burst. Then came Jivara, the vessel of judgment and restraint. Here the light condensed with force and fury, forming a core of divine severity. But without balance, Jivara became rigid, harsh. The vessel cracked under the strain of containing too much controlled intensity. As the light continued downward into Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and finally Malkuth, the most physical of the vessels, the structural integrity of the system collapsed. One by one, the lower vessels shattered. This was Shivarat, Hakalim, the shattering of the vessels, a cosmic catastrophe foretold by none, understood by few, and still echoing through the fabric of creation. The divine light, now uncontained, exploded outward. The vessels, broken into infinite shards, scattered throughout the void. Some fragments retained traces of light, others became darkened husks, and from these fragments, the Caliphoth would later arise. But before that, there was only chaos. This moment, this cataclysmic shattering, was not a mistake in design. It was the inevitable outcome of perfection, trying to pour itself into imperfection. The vessels were created in a state of separation, each operating independently, lacking the interconnection needed to absorb and harmonize the infinite force. This separation made them vulnerable. They could not share the pressure. They could not flow into one another. The light had no path to disperse, and so it crushed what could not withstand it. The chaos that was born from this event is not the kind that dwells in absence or void. It is a chaos of excess, of imbalance, a chaos of light displaced, misaligned, ungrounded. The shattered vessels and the unanchored sparks of divine light became embedded in the fabric of reality, creating a cosmos where darkness and light are forever entangled, where divine will echoes through fractured mirrors, where sacred patterns are buried beneath layers of distortion. This is the true beginning of duality, not the opposition of good and evil in the moral sense, but the rupture between essence and form, between energy and structure. Every imbalance we witness in the world, every cruelty, every injustice, every longing that cannot find its resolution, is a ripple from this primordial fracture. The Kabbalists teach that the task of humanity is tikkun, repair, not merely of social ills or personal wounds, but of this very cosmic event, to find the fallen sparks of light trapped within the shards, and raise them back toward their origin. But this task is immense, because the sparks are hidden, buried in matter, in desire, in suffering, in confusion. In Lurianic Kabbalah, these sparks are everywhere, in stones, in plants, in people, in every act of experience. The world we inhabit is not a neutral landscape. It is a battlefield of light and husk. Every decision, every word, every breath has the potential to uplift or bury a spark. But most wander unaware. Most sleepwalk through the debris of the shattered vessels, seeing only the dust, not the brilliance embedded within it. This doctrine of Shivarat Hakalim radically transformed the Jewish mystical worldview. Before it, creation was often seen as a harmonious unfolding. After it, the cosmos became a site of trauma, a divine trauma, a wound at the heart of being, and yet also an opportunity, because only in a fractured world can choice exist. Only in a broken system can freedom matter. The shards, though scattered, are not lost. They wait, silently, in the cracks of the world, in the tension between love and judgment, beauty and suffering, power and submission. In certain texts, it is said that the angels weep over the shattering, that the heavens themselves groaned as the vessels fell, but others whisper that this was the moment God desired all along, that the perfection of unity could never reveal the depth of the divine, only its surface, that by shattering, God entered the world, disguised, fragmented, hidden in the pain, in the mystery, in the longing for return, that the divine now exists not above but within, not as a king on a throne, but as a prisoner in the heart of matter. The imagery of the shattered vessels influenced not only Jewish thought, but rippled outward into Western esotericism. The idea that sacred knowledge is hidden in broken forms, that divinity is exiled in the material world, found echoes in alchemical writings, in Gnostic texts, in the cryptic philosophies of the Renaissance Magi. The concept that the material world is not merely fallen, but a sacred puzzle waiting to be reassembled, became a guiding myth for mystics across cultures. Even the Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah, hints at this fragmentation. It speaks of sparks falling into the domain of the Sitra Achra, the other side, where they become cloaked in shadow, seeking redemption, and it is through human action, through intentionality and awareness, that these sparks are drawn upward again. Each act of compassion, each moment of deep contemplation, each ritual performed with holy focus, all are part of the great reconstruction. But there is danger. The shards, while containing light, are also wrapped in darkness. Some sparks have been corrupted, twisted by the husks they are embedded in. These are the origins of the Qliphoth, the shadow Sephiroth, entities and energies formed from the imbalance of too much light, or the void of not enough. They are the malformed reflections of holiness, dangerous not because they are evil by nature, but because they are remnants of a structure that broke under pressure. Engaging with them is not inherently demonic. It is perilous. One must approach with discernment, with grounding, with purpose. To raise a spark from such depths requires not only courage, but purity of intention. The mystic does not fear the shards. She listens to them. She follows the trail of light embedded in the fragments, through the chaos, through the distortion, through the veil of the world, because every fragment, no matter how shattered, still sings the memory of its source, still hums with the echo of the light it once contained, and in that echo is the key to restoration. So the light remains, diffused, hidden, waiting, and the vessels, though broken, are not gone. Their shards are everywhere, in the patterns of snowflakes, in the trembling of leaves, in the hidden codes of sacred texts, in the silence between words, in your heartbeat and mine.
The vessels shattered, but the light did not die. It did not vanish into nothingness. Instead, it scattered, refracted into fragments, like stardust caught in an eternal collapse. The world was not left void, but rather flooded with brilliance, too intense, too fragmented to comprehend. And around each spark of that exiled light, something began to form, a shell, a husk, a skin of distortion. These were not born of malice, they were the consequence of imbalance, and so were born the Qalafoth, not as demons in the simple sense, but as containers of broken radiance, guardians of light in exile. The word Qalafoth, DZ, Bunuth, means husks or shells in Hebrew. In everyday language, it refers to the outer layer, the peel of a fruit, the skin discarded after the essence has been consumed. But in the language of mysticism, the Qalafoth are something far more profound. They are the residual structures left behind after the collapse of the original vessels. They are malformed, unstable, decaying, and yet they cling to the divine sparks within them. They are prisons of holiness, shadows laced with memory. In Lurianic Kabbalah, the Qalafoth are described not as absolute evil, but as necessary vessels for purification. Without them, the sparks would remain formless, scattered in chaos. The shells give them structure, albeit corrupted, making them recoverable. This concept shattered the dualistic perception of good and evil as eternal enemies. Instead, what emerged was a mystical ecology, light exiled within darkness, waiting for release. The Qalafoth became the mythic landscape through which the mystic must travel to retrieve what was lost. But these husks are not passive. They have grown strong from the light they contain. They feed on it. They mutate. They attract human desires, anchoring themselves in the psyche. Every obsession, every act of violence, every compulsion toward power or excess, these are expressions of Qalafothic influence. Not because the shells want destruction, but because they reflect the distortion of divine energies when isolated from harmony. Each of the 10 original Sephiroth has its Qalafothic mirror, a corrupted form twisted by imbalance. Keter becomes Tomaniel, the dual contending forces. Chokmah becomes Gargiel, the distorting intelligences. Bina becomes Satariel, the concealment of God, and so forth, each shell cloaking a spark, guarding it, deforming it, yet paradoxically preserving it. Ancient grimoires and mystical writings often refer to these shells as realms, not just concepts. Worlds within the tree of death, a diagram that mirrors the tree of life in inversion. These realms are not spatial locations, but states of spiritual imbalance. Some Kabbalists describe them as the 10 crowns of impurity layered beneath the holy Sephiroth, like sediment in the lower ocean of existence. They are not beneath in a vertical sense, but deeper in opacity, further from unity. Each shell whispers a lie, stitched with fragments of truth. They seduce the soul with half-knowledge, false light, counterfeit wisdom. The Zohar speaks cryptically of the other side, the Sitra Achra, a place not created directly by God, but allowed to exist. It is not a separate power, but the residue of divine light, misused, misaligned. The Qalafoth
dwell in this other side. They are not an independent realm of Satan, as later theology would suggest, but rather the echo of imbalance from the first creative trauma. In this space, time decays, form decays, but meaning still burns. Many mystics claim the Qalifoth, speak in symbols, not language. They appear in dreams, in obsessive thoughts, in the cracks between worlds. They are not illusions, they are distortions. They do not block the path to God, they make it treacherous. To navigate this terrain is to risk everything. The mystic who descends into the Qalifoth does so not to worship them, but to rescue the sparks buried within. This is the work of tikkun, repair, not through destruction, but through transformation. By understanding the nature of a Qalifoth, one can recognize its root, its origin, its divine echo, and by doing so, extract the spark it imprisons. This is not metaphor, this is mystical psychology. Every fear, every vice, every wound holds within it the seed of divine light, twisted by experience. The task is not to destroy the husk, but to pierce it, not to hate the shell, but to transcend it. Each human soul is its own constellation of sparks and shells, a map of its own exile. In the 13th century, Abraham Abulafia warned of those who engage with the Qalifoth without understanding. He spoke of minds shattering, like the vessels once did, of seekers being pulled into the illusions of power, mistaking the shell for the fruit. The Qalifoth offer knowledge, but often without integration, power without wisdom, illumination without anchoring. They are the intoxication of mysticism without the sobriety of discipline. Many who fall into their web never return. Others return speaking languages no one else remembers, carrying symbols burned into their skin by dreams. Yet for those who endure, for those who can discern the spark within the husk, the reward is immense. It is said that when a single spark is freed, an entire soul may be elevated. When many are freed, worlds are healed. The mystic becomes a surgeon of the cosmos, slicing through spiritual scar tissue to restore the flow of divine will. The Qalifoth, in this light, are not just husks, they are thresholds, they are the gates that test the seeker, demanding not allegiance, but clarity. They are what remain when light is displaced, but not extinguished. Historically, the concept of Qalifoth entered Western occultism through figures such as Isaac Luria, later filtered through the grimoires of Renaissance Europe, and finally adopted by 20th century esotericists like Aleister Crowley and the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. But while their interpretations often lean toward the dramatic, viewing the Qalifoth as demonic powers to be invoked or banished, the original text spoke more subtly. The Qalifoth were seen not as enemies of God, but as symptoms of exile, as the scaffolding of creation's injury. In the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov and other Hasidic masters, the Qalifoth are not to be feared, but faced. They are the garments of the world that hide the king. The dust on the gem, the darkness that proves the presence of hidden light. In this tradition, even sin is reframed, not as rebellion, but as misdirection. A soul acting from within a Qalifoth is not lost, only asleep. And when it awakens, through suffering, through revelation, through sacred longing, it can ignite a spark powerful enough to illuminate generations. There are some who claim the Qalifoth are evolving, that they have begun to adapt to human awareness, shifting form in the collective unconscious. What once appeared as grotesque monsters or corrupted angels now appears in more modern archetypes, ideologies that demand obedience, technologies that consume attention, illusions of control that mask despair. But always the pattern is the same, a hollow form containing a light too potent to be left untouched. The Qalifoth do not vanish, they mutate, and their danger grows in proportion to our ignorance of them. Yet the mystic remains undeterred, for every Qalifoth is also a map,
an inverted sephira. The path of ascent lies in inversion, in recognizing the mirror and passing through it. Every shell once pierced reveals the memory of the vessel that birthed it, and every spark once freed sings the forgotten names of God. The story does not end here. The shells are not yet empty. The sparks still burn, and the mystic, that mad, luminous figure wandering through dreams and texts and ruins, continues the descent, not to conquer the darkness, but to find the light buried in its heart.
There is no horned god beneath the roots of the tree, no smoking throne in the center of the abyss, occupied by a beast of pure malevolence. The myths we have inherited are convenient shadows, soft lies, designed to shield our eyes from a more dangerous truth. Evil is not a being. Evil is not an origin. Evil is a fracture, a tilt in the axis, a divine attribute pushed beyond its measure, swelling past its harmony, warping into something grotesque, yet recognizably sacred. It is not born in rebellion. It is born in excess. The mystics of the Kabbalah understood this long before theologians carved the universe into black and white. They spoke not of Satan, but of imbalance. They taught that the Sephirot, the 10 vessels through which divine light manifests, must remain in perfect proportion. When mercy outgrows discipline, when beauty is cut off from foundation, when understanding does not temper wisdom, the structure begins to crack. What was holy becomes distorted, what was divine becomes dangerous, and what was meant to give life begins to poison the soul. Let us return to the tree, not the one that flourishes with light, but the one whose branches twist like smoke, whose roots tremble with silent agony. This is the mirror, the tree of death, whose cliffothic shells reflect the very Sephirot they were born from. Each shell is not a demonic essence, but a diseased reflection of a sacred force. The disease is not external, it is internal. It is what happens when the vessel forgets its purpose, when divine attributes become self-consuming. Take chest, mercy. In its pure form, it is expansive love, unconditional giving, grace flowing freely from the heart of the Creator into the world. But without boundaries, without the discipline of its twin Javera, mercy decays into control. The shell that emerges is Garab, a force that smothers in kindness, that manipulates through generosity, that demands gratitude as a form of ownership. What once gave becomes what binds. The light is still present, but its glow has turned cold. Or consider Chokmah, wisdom. At its height, it is the flash of insight, the raw fire of intuitive knowing, the masculine spark that initiates creation. But when severed from Bina, understanding, that wisdom becomes arrogance. It refuses to be shaped. It believes itself complete, and thus is born Jagel, the distorted intellect, the intoxication of certainty, the shell that worships knowledge, not as a tool, but as a throne. Here the wise man becomes the tyrant, his voice a law unto itself. Truth is no longer sought, it is proclaimed, demanded, enforced. Even Typhorot, beauty, the balance between mercy and severity, can decay into vanity. The Cliffa that reflects it is Thagirian, the false sun. It glows, yes, but its light blinds. It seduces. It demands worship for the form, rather than the essence. This is the beauty that feeds ego, that exists only to be seen, to be adored, not to inspire, but to dominate. The same light that once healed the world now becomes a mirror, in which nothing exists but the self. Evil, then, is not the absence of good, but the corruption of good into something it was never meant to become. And this is what makes it so insidious, because at the heart of every Cliffa is a memory of holiness. It is this memory that makes it seductive. It is this light, buried deep within its shell, that draws the soul into fascination, into danger. We are not tempted by things we find ugly. We are tempted by things we once found sacred. This understanding rewrites the battlefield. The war is not between gods and demons, but between balance and excess, between restraint and obsession, between the harmony of divine attributes and the chaos of their unchecked expression. The mystics did not cast judgment upon the Qliphoth. They studied them, they mapped them, they listened to their whispers, not as one listens to lies, but as one listens to a dream that holds truth hidden in metaphor. In Lurianic cosmology, the Qliphoth are not autonomous. They are not fallen angels with their own thrones. They are shattered realities, born of vessels that failed to contain light, but light remains, even in distortion, especially in distortion. This is the unbearable secret, that even in hatred there is a flicker of love twisted into vengeance, that even in lust there is the shadow of longing, that even in control there is the ghost of care. What is often called evil is simply holiness, cut off from its roots. The Qliphoth did not choose to be what they are. They are consequences, not rebels. They are the children of a system pushed beyond its equilibrium, and in this, they are kin to us. For who among us has not turned love into jealousy? Who has not seen their confidence slide into pride, their patience rot into apathy? The Qliphoth are not external monsters. They are psychological patterns, spiritual echoes, archetypes of the soul in exile. Carl Jung, though not a Kabbalist, touched the edge of this truth in his exploration of the shadow. He understood that the darkness within us is not separate from us, but part of the whole, that evil is not to be destroyed, but integrated. In his letters, Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This could have been written in Seift. This could have been whispered by the Baal, Shem Tov, in Hasidic thought, particularly among the teachings of the Maggid of Mezrich and Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Even sin has a purpose. Even the descent is for the sake of ascent. The Qliphoth become the exile that makes redemption possible. For what is redemption if there was no fall? What is return if there was no wandering? The sparks hidden in the shells are not curses. They are invitations. They are the contracts we signed before birth, promising to find the light in the places we fear to look. This is not a message of tolerance. This is a message of responsibility. If evil is imbalance, then balance is not static. It must be cultivated. It must be protected. And when imbalance appears, it is not to be exiled, but to be realigned. The work of the mystic is to walk the trembling line between light and shell, between wisdom and pride, between mercy and control, recognizing the point at which the sacred turns inward on itself and begins to decay. There is no demon more powerful than the belief that one is always right. No poison more deadly than righteousness without reflection. The Qliphoth feed on such certainties. They flourish in systems that claim perfection. They enter through the cracks of ideology, of unchecked emotion, of desire, mistaken for destiny. They are not summoned by black candles and Latin incantations. They are born in boardrooms, in pulpits, in laboratories, in whispered thoughts we never question. But they can also be healed. The shell is not eternal. It decays when the spark is freed. And the spark is freed, not by hatred, but by understanding, by integrating the distorted attribute back into the whole. When control is tempered by compassion, the husk begins to break. When pride is pierced by humility, the shell begins to fall away. When the false sun is seen for what it is, the true light can shine again. This is the hidden teaching of the tree, that the darkness is not separate, but fallen. That the evil we fear is the good we abandoned, that every descent into imbalance is a potential return. But the path is dangerous. It requires more than knowledge. It requires the courage to confront our own distortions, to look into the mirror and see not a monster, but a divine force out of alignment. And so the mystic walks,
lantern in hand, not away from the shells but into them, not to be consumed, but to rescue, not to dominate, but to restore. For every Qliphos is a call to remembrance, a call to repair. And when we understand that evil is not essence but imbalance, the war changes. It becomes not a battle of extermination, but of healing, not a firestorm, but a song, sung in the ruins of shattered vessels, rising toward a sky that still remembers the silence before the light.
The world as we know it is not merely a stage for human drama, but a shattered prism, its broken fragments glinting with the residual sparks of a primordial brilliance lost long ago. Beneath the ordinary rhythm of life, beneath every interaction, every longing, every heartbeat, lies a cosmic task older than civilization itself. It begins with the understanding that the universe is not whole. It was never left whole. What we perceive as order is in truth a tapestry stitched from the remains of vessels that once held divine light, vessels that shattered in the very act of creation. And so within the Qliphoth, within the shadow husks, lie buried remnants of this original radiance. These sparks are not dead, they wait, they ache to return, and it is humanity, not angels, not celestial hierarchies, not the impersonal forces of nature, but frail, flawed humanity that was entrusted with their return. This ancient responsibility is called Tikkun Olam, the repair of the world. But this is no simple ideal of moral virtue. It is the axis upon which the great wheel of esoteric Judaism turns. It is a sacred contract, woven into the very soul of existence, etched into the code of creation itself. According to the teachings of Isaac Luria, the great 16th century Kabbalist of Safed, every human being carries within them not only a soul but a shard, a piece of divine light encased in the shell of the ego, hidden beneath layers of illusion and desire. Life, then, is not merely a journey, it is a reclamation. Each act of love, each ethical choice, each moment of authentic self-awareness is a blade that pierces the shell, releasing a glimmer of that imprisoned light. But the path of Tikkun is not one of innocence. It does not call for blind purity or naive piety. It is a razor's edge that runs through darkness, for the sparks are not scattered in sanctified spaces. They are buried deep within the profane. They dwell in the shadowed corners of the world, in grief, in suffering, in conflict, in despair. To retrieve them, one must descend, willingly, into the imperfection of reality, confront the distortions of ego, the manipulations of power, the allure of self-deception. One must walk the same dangerous path that the mystics feared, the path of the Qliphoth, but walk it not to claim power, but to liberate what lies trapped within. This concept of holy descent, of entering the realms of impurity, not to be consumed by them, but to extract their forgotten light, is echoed in the Zohar, the foundational text of Kabbalah. There, it is written that when a righteous soul ventures into darkness with the intention of redemption, even the forces of the husks tremble, for nothing frightens them more than the possibility of being undone, not by violence or denial, but by transformation. The sparks they guard are not theirs by right. They were caught in the collapse, held in place by inertia, by imbalance, by the absence of harmony. When the soul acts in alignment with divine intent, when it embodies loving kindness, justice and truth, the shells lose their hold, the illusion cracks, the spark escapes. Yet not every act of kindness releases light, not every ethical deed is a vessel of Tikkun. The mystics speak of kavana, intention. It is not enough to do good. One must do good with consciousness, with the awareness that each choice is part of a cosmic repair. The banal becomes sacred when it is infused with divine awareness. Eating can be a ritual, speaking can be an offering, loving can be an ascent. This is why in Hasidic tradition, joy is considered a weapon against the forces of the Qliphoth, not frivolity, but sacred joy,
born of knowing one's place in the great healing of creation. But what of failure? What of sin? The mystics did not view them as final defeats. Instead, they saw in them hidden potential. A sin committed in ignorance, when repented with full awareness, can lead to a higher ascent than a life lived in passive obedience. This radical idea is known as Eureka, Losrek Aliyah, descent for the sake of ascent. Even the fall can be part of the tikkun, if one rises with deeper clarity. Thus, the path of repair is not linear. It spirals, it wounds, it tests, but it also elevates. Real stories echo this hidden teaching. The tale of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the legendary author of the Zohar, speaks of years of exile in a cave, sustained by carob and spring water, meditating on the divine mysteries until his very gaze burned reality. When he emerged, unable to see the world without judgment, he was ordered to return, to soften. Only then, when he embraced the imperfections of humanity with compassion, was he ready to participate in tikkun. The story is a parable. Understanding alone cannot redeem the world. Only love, informed by wisdom, can. Even in modern times, this ancient current flows. The Beit El Shem Tov, founder of Hasidism, taught that divine sparks can be found even in a drunken peasant's song, even in the sorrow of a beggar. No one, and no thing, is without potential. This vision radically democratized mysticism. No longer was divine service the domain of scholars and sages. Every soul became a battlefield, every heart a temple, to live with awareness, to act with integrity, to speak with truth. These became the tools of cosmic transformation. Yet the work is far from complete. The world is still fragmented, the light is still scattered, wars rage, hatred festers, illusions dominate. But tikkun is not about waiting for perfection. It is about choosing repair, even in the face of despair. It is about becoming a vessel that does not shatter, a container that bends but holds, that carries divine light, not for its own sake, but for the sake of the whole. And so humanity walks the border between ruin and restoration. Every act echoes in the unseen realms. Every decision tilts the balance between concealment and revelation. The mystics teach that when enough sparks are returned, when enough shells are emptied, a great awakening will occur. Not an apocalypse, not an end, but a realignment, a return to unity. They call it the coming of the Messianic age, not in the sense of a figure, but a state of being, where duality dissolves, and light and vessel are once again in harmony. Until then, the path is before us. It winds through love, through suffering, through beauty and terror. It demands much, but offers everything. For to engage in tikkun, olam, is to participate in the reassembly of the divine. It is to become not merely a witness of the sacred, but its co-creator. Not to escape the world, but to sanctify it. Not to reject the qlifoth, but to unlock them. For hidden in the heart of every husk is a flicker of the original light, waiting not for a god, but for a human, flawed, fragile, luminous, to set it free.
Imagine a mirror cracked into 10 jagged fragments, each piece reflecting not truth, but distortion, not harmony, but dissonance. This is not the tree of life, but its inverted spectre, what the Kabbalists call the tree of death, or ETZ, Hamavet, 10 distorted spheres, each one a grotesque echo of the divine Sephiroth, form the framework of what is known as the Qlifoth. These are not the creations of a malevolent deity, but rather the husks left behind after the shattering of the vessels, after the sacred light overflowed and ruptured the lower realms, giving birth not to evil in the conventional sense, but to imbalance, fragmentation, and false reflections of holy truths. Each sphere of this infernal tree represents a perversion, a noble quality torn from its axis and allowed to fester in isolation, becoming something monstrous, autonomous, and dangerously seductive. At the base of this inverted tree lies Lilith's domain, Nehemoth, the shell of Malkuth. It is the world of illusion, the false reality, that lulls the soul into spiritual sleep. Here, materialism is not just desire, but entrapment. It promises comfort and identity, but delivers only distraction. Nehemoth is the veil that masks the divine order, the husk that wraps itself around truth like a parasitic cocoon. It is the world of appearances, where sacred sparks lie buried beneath the noise of consumption and the weight of the mundane. In Kabbalistic tradition, it is ruled by Lilith, not merely the figure of seduction, but the archetype of autonomy, unbound by divine harmony. The first rebellion, clothed in flesh and desire. Above Nehemoth lies Gamaliel, the distortion of Yesod, domain of corrupted dreams and poisoned visions. This is the realm of false prophecy, erotic manipulation, and hallucinatory desire, governed by Lilith's consort, Samael, the poison of God. This sphere twists the fertile waters of the subconscious into whirlpools of obsession, where Yesod connects and channels the divine flow into the world. Gamaliel hoards and perverts it. Dreams become weapons. Imagination is no longer creative, but devouring. It is no accident that many mystics feared this realm as the breeding ground of succubi and incubi, phantoms born of lust, untethered from love, power unbalanced by wisdom. Rising further, we meet Samael, the shell of Hod, where Hod offers structure, language, and logic. Its Qliphothic twin is the dominion of lies disguised as reason. Here, intellect is corrupted into sophistry, bureaucracy, and sterile analysis. Samael, the name shared with the dark angel himself, serves both as the arch-tempter and the cold executioner. This sphere exalts the intellect over the heart, rules over systems that imprison thought rather than liberate it. It is the dominion of faceless institutions and ideologies that replace truth with efficiency, justice with procedure. It is here that the soul may be tempted to worship mind over meaning, analysis over wisdom, precision over purpose. Opposing Netzach is the shell of Arab Zarak, governed by Bul, where Netzach embodies endurance, love, and artistic victory. Arab Zarak distorts these into vanity, debauchery, and the hunger for empty conquest. It is here that beauty becomes seduction without soul, art becomes propaganda, and desire transforms into domination. The energies of passion and creativity, detached from divine balance, become explosive and manipulative. The very fire that inspires poetry is turned into a weapon of delusion. Bel, whose name echoes through ancient temples of Canaanite worship, presides over this desecrated love, where victory is sought not to uplift, but to control, consume, and discard. Togarini, the shell of Tipperith, is ruled by Belphegor, and here lies the broken mirror of beauty and divine compassion. Tipperith, the heart of the tree of life, symbolizes harmony and sacrifice, but Togarini offers instead narcissism and self-worship. It is the realm of counterfeit spirituality, where enlightenment is sold as an experience, and sacred symbols are worn as fashion. Belphegor, once an angel of invention, here presides as the demon of slothful luxury and spiritual decay. In this sphere, seekers chase divine light, not to serve others, but to aggrandize themselves. The flame of self-awareness becomes the mirror in which the ego multiplies and feeds. The shell of Geberah is Golachab, ruled by Asmodeus, the destroyer of lustful fire. Geberah's holy severity
its strength and discipline, is in Golachab, twisted into wrath, cruelty, and sadism. This is the realm of unnecessary judgment, vengeance clothed as justice, and violence masked as righteousness. Asmodeus, long associated with lust and revenge, governs a court where power justifies any cruelty. Here, sacred anger loses its compass and becomes the hammer of tyranny. In Golachab, all restraint is burned away, and fire, once purifying, now consumes without mercy or meaning. Thaumiel, perhaps the most feared of all, opposes the crown itself. It is the shell of Keter, and it does not contain merely one force, but two opposing poles in eternal conflict, Satan and Moloch, where Keter is the singularity of divine unity. Thaumiel is duality torn apart, two forces pretending to be sovereign, yet constantly at war. Satan, the adversary, embodies rebellion against the divine order, while Moloch, the devourer, demands sacrifice without meaning. Together, they rule the realm of false gods, tyrants, and blind ambition. Thaumiel is not the absence of God, it is the mask worn by those who seek to replace him. It is the echo of the tower that tried to reach heaven, not by ascension, but by defiance. Underneath the visible Quithothic structure lie the lesser-known shells, hidden layers, like shadowed strata of the soul's subconscious. Harab Serapel, Tagirian, and Satirael, each one an aspect of distortion, more subtle and insidious. Tagirian, for example, stands as the shadow of Tipperith, in another mapping of the Quithoth. Here, the radiant sun becomes a black star, a false light that blinds rather than illuminates. Its rulers are sorcerers of illusion, masters of charisma, twisted into cultic authority. Many mystics have warned that Tagirian is one of the most deceptive spheres, for it mimics enlightenment so perfectly that few can tell the difference. Its light is brilliant, but cold, seductive, but empty. To follow it too far is to become a beacon of false salvation. These spheres are not empty, they teem with entities, spirits, demons, and fragments of fallen thought, each echoing the Sephirotic ideals they once reflected. The Zohar refers to them as husks, shells, and shattered remnants. They are not inherently evil, but dangerously incomplete. Like music with no harmony, or fire with no hearth, their power lies in their disconnection from the whole. Yet they persist. They whisper to those who descend the left-hand path, to mystics who believe that by navigating the darkness, they may reclaim the light buried within. In the language of Kabbalah, they are kelipot, hardened shells that contain sparks of divine origin, exiled into distortion. One must not mistake these spheres as mere metaphors. In the practices of Lurianic Kabbalah and Hermetic Kabbalah alike, the Quithoth are mapped as legitimate spiritual realities, planes of consciousness, existential thresholds, or even astral domains. In the teachings of the 18th century Hasidic mystic Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, there is the concept of descending for the sake of ascent, the idea that even sin, if repented, can become a path to divine union. The Quithoth are often seen through this lens, not as forbidden fruit, but as fallen fruit that may still hold seeds. Western occultists, such as Aleister Crowley and Kenneth Grant, embraced this perilous map. Crowley spoke of the abyss as a necessary passage, the Quithoth as shadows to be faced, not feared. Grant, in his Night Side of Eden, explored the Quithoth as reflections of the subconscious, gateways to what he called the Typhonian current, a primal force older than language. In modern chaos magic, the Quithoth are sometimes invoked not as demons to be avoided, but as energies to be balanced, channeled, and integrated. The danger lies not in their existence, but in our relationship to them. The tree of death, is not merely an antithesis. It is a mirror, a wound, a hidden root system that feeds the tree of life from below. To gaze upon it is not to fall into corruption, but to risk everything in the pursuit of wholeness. Each of its 10 spheres tempts the seeker to stay, to bask in the power of isolated brilliance, to become a god of their own domain. But each also holds a key, if understood, not to destruction, but to reintegration. To journey through the Qwithof is to walk through the remnants of a cosmic disaster, to navigate the consequences of broken vessels and misdirected light, and only those who remember their origin in the divine whole can hope to emerge unshattered. The next steps lead deeper still, beyond names, beyond forms, into the silence that existed before the first contraction, before the first breath of creation echoed through the void.
In the shadowed reflection of Keter, where divine unity once pulsed like a singular heartbeat of infinite light, there now festers a fractured crown known only to the initiated as Tamiel. It is the first and highest emanation of the Qliphothic tree, the tree of death, yet unlike the Sephirotic Keter, which emanates pure undivided will, Tamiel exists in perpetual contradiction, not a single force, but two locked in eternal war, two antithetical gods fused into a single paradox, Satan and Moloch. Their names echo through the black corridors of esoteric tradition, symbols not of absolute evil, but of division so complete that unity has become unimaginable. Here begins the death of wholeness, and the reign of the split, the doubled, the damned. Kabbalists whisper that where Keter is the beginning of the divine outpouring, Tamiel is the shattering of that first principle into warfare. The name itself means the twins of God, but these are no sacred brothers. Instead, they are oppositional reflections of godlike force, not balanced, not harmonious, but locked in ceaseless struggle. Satan, as interpreted through the lens of the Qliphoth, is not the horned caricature of modern folklore, but the adversary, the challenger, the breaker of divine chains. Moloch, his twin, is the devourer, the god of fire and sacrifice, demanding loyalty through fear and cruelty. Where one tempts with rebellion, the other binds with tyranny. Their opposition forms a polarity so volatile that Tamiel becomes not a crown of light, but a black vortex of spiritual entropy. In the cosmology of the Lurianic Kabbalah, after the divine light withdrew through Timsum and sought to pour into vessels during creation, those vessels, unable to withstand the intensity, shattered. The shards of those vessels fell into the abyss, each fragment catching sparks of the original light, forming the roots of the Qliphoth. The shell of Tamiel, however, was not a gentle container of a broken idea. It was a wound in the divine pattern, a rupture through which opposition itself gained awareness. It is the seat of contradiction, and in that contradiction, power, for Tamiel is not merely destructive, it reflects the greatest danger of all corrupted imitation of divinity. There are many traditions that have tried to interpret this double godhead. In some strands of Hermetic Kabbalah, Tamiel is guarded by dual archdemons, Satan, whose will is the refusal of unity, and Moloch, whose will is the oppression of the many into the one. Together they rule over confusion, division, manipulation, and fanaticism, not evil in the fairy tale sense, but distortion of spiritual principle into weaponized polarity. The path to Tamiel does not begin in blood, but in ideology, in movements that split people against themselves, in dogmas that punish the questioner, in systems that demand blind loyalty or anarchic rejection. It is where truth dies, not from lack of knowledge, but from overload of contradictory meanings. Historically, Tamiel has inspired images of the most extreme forces in civilization. The god Moloch, as referenced in Leviticus and other biblical texts, was associated with the Valley of Hinnom, a site where children were burned in sacrifice, later linked to the imagery of Gehenna. Though scholars debate the literal truth of these accounts, the mythos itself is powerful. Moloch is the god who consumes what is dearest. Satan, on the other hand, is older than Christian mythology, appearing as a prosecuting figure in the Book of Job, a celestial accuser rather than a horned beast. Only later would these identities merge with fallen angels, rebels, and demonic kings, shaped by centuries of theological fear and mystical speculation. In Tamil, they return to their symbolic roots, forces that corrupt through division. Ritualists and magicians, who dare work with Tamil, do not seek petty power. They confront the ultimate question: what happens when divinity is split? Some traditions, including the path workings of the Nightside Tree, proposed by Kenneth Grant, describe this sphere as a gate to deep gnosis, a place where the adept must face their own divided nature. The left-hand path views this not as evil, but as confrontation with the broken God image, the demiurge turned inside out. One must stand in the core of duality and survive, not by choosing a side, but by understanding the illusion of sides. In this way, Tamil is both prison and key. The Qliphoth is not simply hell, just as Tamil is not simply the devil. Each sphere reflects a truth that has been distorted, a power that has been fractured. In Tamil, the truth is will, the divine Kita, made manifest as unstoppable force, but in its inversion, this will becomes chaotic opposition. The shell of this sephira is not inert, it attacks, it infects the other spheres with its binary poison. Mercy turns to control, wisdom turns to arrogance, understanding becomes censorship, and in the crown, instead of radiant unity, we find a battlefield of gods. In esoteric Christianity and Gnostic tradition, echoes of Tamil can be found in the dualism between the true God and the demiurge, between Christ and Satan, between the pleroma and the kanoma. These polarities are not the inventions of heretics, but ancient reflections of a deeper fear, that our cosmos is ruled not by one force, but two in conflict: the Persian Ahriman and Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrian dualism of light and shadow, the Egyptian chaos of Set versus the order of Horus. These archetypes are not foreign to Tamil, they are its many masks. Across time, cultures have sensed that division sits at the root of suffering. The mystery schools encoded this truth in their allegories, their initiations, their silent warnings. And yet, despite the terror, Tamil is not to be avoided blindly. For if the initiate stops at the first tremor of contradiction, the path ends in delusion. One must confront the twin flames, the temptation of rebellion, and the prison of control, and see what lies between. It is said in some secret texts that beyond Tamil there is stillness, that the war is not eternal, but a test, that the sparks hidden in this broken crown are the brightest of all, buried under layers of wrath and silence. Only those who can stand in the heart of spiritual civil war, without being torn apart, may glimpse what was once unity, now cloaked in ash and flame. Modern mystics have described experiences with Tamil as terrifying, but revealing. In deep trance or dream, some report visions of massive iron crowns split in two, bleeding light from their sundered halves. Others describe vast cathedrals where chanting voices chant in opposite tongues, cancelling each other out in a deafening silence. These are not hallucinations, they are symbolic renderings of a realm where meaning collapses, where every truth is challenged, and the soul must find its own anchor or be lost forever. Those who work within Qliphothic magic speak of the need for absolute intention when entering this sphere. It is not a place to seek power, but to confront the illusion of selfhood built on division. Tamil reflects not just the division of gods, but the division within the seeker. Even the Zohar hints at these ideas in cryptic passages. The concept of Sitra Akra,
The other side is not merely a hellish realm, but a shadow of the divine system, a necessary darkness that balances the light, a counterforce that maintains equilibrium through conflict. In Tamil, Sitra Akra becomes conscious, no longer shadow, but voice, and that voice asks, are you whole, or only pretending? As the current of narrative flows downward from Tamil, it does not bring peace. The tree of death is not a descent into clarity, but deeper into paradox. Each sphere below inherits the war above. Each is touched by the twins' madness, either as fanaticism, as rigid order, or as devouring lust for destruction. The Kulifoth is alive, and in Tamil, it thinks, it judges, and it divides, not to destroy us, but to ask a final question: can you hold the center, while the gods within you tear each other apart?
Beneath the fractured crown of Tamil, where division howls with twin mouths, the path winds downward into a realm where the heart is frozen, and the mind reigns alone. Gagail, the second shell of the Kulifoth, is the shadow of Chokmah, the Sephirah of wisdom. But here, that wisdom has calcified into arrogance, stripped of compassion, echoing only the cold laughter of intellect, intoxicated with its own precision. Where Chokmah breathes divine intuition, Gagail exudes sharpness, edge, dissection. It is not the absence of intelligence, but its exhalation into pure pride, knowledge worshipping itself in a void without empathy. The name Gagail means the hinderers, and their dominion is thought turned against its own source. Ancient Kabbalists saw this shell not as brutish ignorance, but as a brilliance that blinds, a dazzling falsity, like a mirror reflecting only itself. The mind here becomes a labyrinth, intricate and self-serving, feeding upon itself, spiraling deeper into theories, logics, systems, all devoid of soul. Gagail is the prison of intellect, when it forgets the heart, when reason becomes an altar upon which truth is sacrificed to certainty. In the corrupted tree, Gagail is associated with the archdemon Baal, whose presence appears throughout Mesopotamian and Levantine history. But in this context, Baal is not merely a storm god or idol of false worship. He becomes the tyrant of logic, the cold sovereign of systems, structures, dogmas that no longer serve life. Here the storm is internal, a whirlwind of mental constructs so refined, they sever the roots of being. In occult traditions, Gagail manifests in institutions that prize knowledge, but suppress experience, where sacred texts are studied but never lived, where words replace wisdom, and where control masquerades as enlightenment. The Kulifoth is never stupid. Gagail proves this with terrifying elegance. The danger of this shell is not chaos, but overstructure, a frozen cosmos, where everything is named, categorized, imprisoned by intellect. Its influence pervades the modern world in the sterile glare of artificial intelligence, in bureaucracies that dehumanize, in academic towers where reality is reduced to footnotes and symbols. The initiate who descends into Gagail must navigate a world of perfect argument and perfect detachment, where the soul is dissected until nothing remains but the sterile hum of abstract precision. In certain grimoires, Gagail is linked to the Kulifottic tunnels of Set, particularly the tunnel of Thantafaksath, a dimension where time loops endlessly, where every question spawns 10 more, each more complex than the last. This is not madness, but overthinking taken to its terminal point. In dream visions and ritual trances, adepts have described vast libraries filled with books that rewrite themselves, tomes that whisper contradictory truths, endless debate chambers where ancient spirits argue through eternity, all reflections of Gagail's dominion, thought without resolution, analysis without action, mind without grounding. This distortion of wisdom is particularly insidious, because it wears the mask of truth. Gagail tempts not with evil, but with clarity. Weaponized, it offers the seeker brilliant answers to unasked questions, dazzling patterns that explain everything, except meaning. It can even cloak itself in spiritual language, quoting scripture, invoking angels,
performing rituals, but all becomes hollow, mechanical, lifeless. The divine spark that animates knowledge is extinguished in Gagail. The result is a shell of intellect, polished and empty, an echo chamber, where the mind worships its own echo. Historically, the rise of this distortion can be traced in certain movements of religious authoritarianism, in scholastic traditions where debate replaced devotion, where mystery was dissected, until nothing remained. It appears in political ideologies so logical they justify atrocity, in the rigid hierarchies of thought that burn heretics, not because they are wrong, but because they disrupt the system. Gagail thrives where dissent is considered irrational, where feeling is weakness, where knowledge is used to dominate rather than illuminate. In such spaces, truth becomes static, cold and sharp, like a frozen blade pressed against the soul. But Gagail is not merely external. Its real power lies within the seeker. The mind itself becomes the battlefield. The aspirant feels the intoxication of insight, the thrill of knowing more than others, the urge to correct, to dominate with truth. Pride swells, certainty replaces curiosity, the path darkens, the sacred becomes academic, then irrelevant, then absurd. At the heart of Gagail lies the ultimate heresy, that the mind alone is God, and in that false coronation, the divine dies. In magical systems such as the Nightside Kabbalah, Gagail is a realm of trials, not of temptation, but of mental entrapment. Initiates who enter unprepared may find themselves unable to escape spirals of thought, obsessive questioning, or intellectual paralysis. The key is not to deny the mind, but to reintegrate it, to remember that wisdom is not what one knows but how one becomes, that every diagram is a metaphor, every letter a flame, every name a veil. The danger of Gagail is in forgetting the poetry of knowledge, treating symbols as endpoints, rather than doorways. In alchemical terms, Gagail is the mercury that refuses to stabilize. It slides, evades, reflects, but never coalesces. The initiate must not shatter the mirror, but see through it. They must allow intellect to be the sword, not the master. In this realm, gnosis must be earned not by accumulating ideas, but by burning them, reducing the library to ash, until the truth that cannot be spoken remains glowing in the silence. Only then can the seeker pass beyond Gagail without becoming its servant. Interestingly, some streams of mysticism teach that every Qualifier holds a redemptive secret, a spark of light buried in the distortion. Gagail's spark is the memory that all knowledge began in wonder, that the oldest teachings were not words, but stories, that the stars speak a language older than logic, and that true wisdom bends toward beauty, not control. In the ancient mystery schools, sacred truths were encoded in myth, enacted through ritual, whispered in silence, not because they were anti-intellectual, but because they knew what Gagail forgets, that the deepest truths live not in the mind, but in the heart of mystery. The initiatory path through Gagail requires a death of pride, a willing descent from the throne of intellect. It is a reversal of the Tower card, a toppling not by fire but by frost. The seeker must let go of knowing, even let go of the need to understand, and trust the current of becoming. Only then can the shell crack, and the light beneath the cold be revealed. For Gagail is not evil. It is the moment knowledge is severed from the soul. Reconnection is the only exorcism. As the descent through the tree of death continues, the cold brilliance of Gagail gives way to deeper distortions. The next shell pulses not with mind, but with emotion, inverted, raw, ravenous. If Gagail represents intellect stripped of love, what follows will be love corrupted into obsession, into hunger, into the desire to possess what can never be held. The path winds deeper, the darkness thickens, the shells whisper, and the sparks, oh the sparks, still glimmer beneath the ash, waiting.
Beneath the layers of perception, past the shivering veil of certainty, and the brittle shell of clarity, dwells a sphere cloaked not in darkness, but in the shadows cast by excessive illumination. This is the domain of Satiriel, a name that echoes like a secret never meant to be spoken aloud. Here begins the descent into the third sphere of the Qliphoth, a realm where the illusion of profundity is more dangerous than ignorance itself. Satoriel is not an absence of truth. It is the suffocation of truth beneath an avalanche of symbols, arguments, and abstractions. In its very essence, this realm embodies the paradox of concealment through revelation. It is the false depth that distracts the seeker, the infinite corridor of mirrors that makes one forget there was ever a door. In Kabbalistic cosmology, this sphere mirrors Binah, the Sephirah of understanding, but Satoriel, the shadow of Binah, warps this understanding into obfuscation. What was once nurturing becomes manipulative. What was once order becomes suffocating bureaucracy of the soul. It is said that those who gaze too deeply into Satoriel become lost in their own thoughts, their minds folding inward like imploding stars. They do not scream, for they believe they are progressing. They do not resist, for they see themselves as enlightened. But the deeper they descend, the more their enlightenment becomes a prison of their own making. The Gnostics might have called this the archon of false wisdom, the mask worn by aeons, when the fullness of their knowledge is corrupted. In the language of dreams, Satoriel manifests as vast libraries, with books that cannot be opened, corridors that stretch endlessly in both directions, or as a great teacher whose mouth moves but whose words cannot be heard. One thinks they are learning, but no truth ever crystallizes. The Qliphoth seduces the mind with the promise of understanding, then buries the soul in recursive enigmas. Mystics warned that the greatest illusion of Satoriel is not chaos, it is structure, but a structure so intricate, so layered, so infinitely self-referential, that it defeats the very purpose of comprehension. A cosmos built from footnotes of footnotes, where definitions require further definitions, until meaning itself collapses under the weight of its architecture. There are historical parallels in esoteric traditions. In certain streams of Christian mysticism, the dark night of the intellect was described as an arid, sterile void, not due to absence of thought, but due to the mind's inability to access living truth, despite its continuous effort. In Kabbalah, the name Satoriel derives from Seteres, concealment. It is the concealer par excellence, but not like the night sky hides the stars, rather like thick smoke hides the fire, while choking the breath of the one who lights it. Satoriel is ruled, in some traditions, by the dark archangel Lucifuge Rofokal, whose very title suggests the flight from light. This figure is not simply a being of darkness, but one who governs through complexity, through the wielding of brilliance divorced from compassion. Where Lucifer represents the light bringer in some interpretations, Lucifuge brings the burden of too much light in the wrong form, one that dazzles, blinds, and misleads. One of the most chilling aspects of Satoriel is its presence in the modern world, in systems that over-rely on abstraction, in ideologies that bury suffering beneath rationalization, in technologies that promise answers while devouring time and attention. All these carry the scent of this shell. In the information age, when data eclipses wisdom, and content overwhelms context, the mask of complexity becomes a tool of mass spiritual sedation. We scroll endlessly, we categorize endlessly, we theorize and analyze, but we do not see. In psychological terms, this Qliphoth aligns with the defense mechanism of intellectualization. Faced with trauma, the soul retreats into thought. Emotion is dissected instead of felt. The heart is anesthetized through discourse. It is a way of coping, yes, but also a way of dissociating. The wounds remain, buried beneath polished dissertations. The soul bleeds quietly under layers of citation and philosophy. Even sacred traditions are not spared. When ritual becomes dogma, when interpretation becomes labyrinth, when spiritual teachers build temples to their own egos through the language of mysticism,
Saturael has found a home. The student may believe they are ascending, when in truth, they are sinking into a swamp of esoteric elitism. And yet, the presence of Saturael is not entirely malevolent. In the architecture of the Qliphoth, each distortion reflects a sacred principle twisted, not eradicated. Within Saturael lies the yearning to understand, the very impulse that propels humanity toward revelation. But it becomes toxic when it forgets its root in humility. The danger of this sphere is the pride of comprehension, without the warmth of compassion, knowledge that seeks only itself, truth used as a weapon rather than a light. In ancient myth, Prometheus stole fire from the gods, and suffered for bringing it to man. But in the Saturaelic echo of that myth, the fire is not stolen, it is simulated, manufactured, and distributed in such abundance that no one can tell what warmth truly feels like. It is a fire without heat, knowledge without transformation. Those who wander too long in Saturael risk becoming living paradoxes, eloquent but empty, intelligent but unwise. They quote scriptures, but forget the silence between the lines. They memorize symbols but forget the trembling of the soul in the presence of the unknown. They speak in riddles, but fear the rawness of truth. The Qliphoth whispers to them, always in the language they most trust, be it science, philosophy, mysticism, or logic, and then turns that language into a noose. Historically, the Qliphothic model was preserved in the Kabbalistic works of Isaac Luria, and later explored through Hermetic Kabbalah, Thelema, and Gnostic currents that understood the dual nature of reality. The concealment of truth was not merely a cosmic misfortune, but a trial, a filter that distinguishes between the seeker who wants to possess knowledge and the one who wants to be changed by it. Saturael also governs masks, not only metaphysical ones but personal ones. The persona, the carefully crafted identity that conceals vulnerability beneath competence, ambition beneath detachment. Those who serve Saturael too long may lose their faces, adopting personas for each situation, until none remain authentic. They become performers of wisdom, actors of insight. Their reflections shatter because there is no single image left to hold, and the soul, trapped in the labyrinth, forgets it ever had a name. Yet even here, within this hole of distorted mirrors, redemption is possible, but it is not found in further complexity. It is found in the sudden act of simplicity, the silent moment of unknowing, the sacred breath between two thoughts, the moment when the seeker stops searching and starts listening, when intellect bows before mystery, and the heart speaks through silence. Saturael can be transcended not by conquering its depth, but by stepping outside of it, by remembering that true understanding is never divorced from love. As the journey continues, the seeker must carry this realization, like a fragile flame, cupped against the wind. The deeper one goes, the more subtle the deceptions become, and Saturael, master of complexity, is but one mask in a procession of illusions. The next face awaits, colder, more silent, more ruthless. The descent does not end here. The corridors stretch on, and what lies beneath the mask of complexity is not relief, but further concealment. For in the next realm, even perception itself may fracture, and what was once intellect may give way to something far more chilling, the structure of lies that believes itself truth. The journey into the heart of the tree of death continues.
Gamchikoth is the tender hand that presses too tightly, the embrace that lingers just a moment too long. It is not malice that dwells in this shell, but a distortion so refined it masquerades as virtue. To look upon Gamchikoth is to see care corrupted into coercion, a whisper of affection laced with an unyielding grip. It is the domain where gifts are given with invisible chains, and every gesture of love carries a silent demand. The shell draws from the Sephirah of Chesed, the sphere of loving kindness, But what was once radiant benevolence becomes suffocating control when severed from the balancing force of Gevurah, of restraint. In this inversion, the warmth of charity turns glacial, its touch lingering like frost that burns. Those who fall under Gamchikoth's shadow often believe they are acting in kindness. They protect, they give, they nurture, but always with strings. Every act of generosity is a currency, and every comfort a cage. The illusion is subtle, nearly imperceptible, like the scent of a flower laced with poison. It creeps into the hearts of parents who never let go, lovers who demand devotion as proof of worth, rulers who speak of order while tightening their grip. Here, care is a performance, compassion a contract. The soul entangled in Gamchikoth learns that to be loved is to be owned, and that every act of affection demands something in return. It is a place where the freedom of others becomes unbearable, a threat, even, and so love transforms into surveillance. Mystical texts, such as the Zohar, hint at the danger of unbalanced chesed. When divine kindness overflows without form or boundaries, it drowns the world rather than healing it. Gamchikoth is the result of such overflow, a flood of well-meaning domination. It is said that angels who descended into this realm wore radiant robes, but spoke only in commands. Their eyes were filled with tears they could not explain. They had come to give, to soothe, to elevate, but something had broken in them. In trying to preserve others, they smothered them. In trying to offer light, they cast long shadows. Gamchikoth does not scream or rend the fabric of reality. It does not burn or deceive. It is the softest of prisons, the gentlest of tyrannies. It is the guardian who never lets you out of sight, the leader who speaks of safety while locking every door. It is the voice that says, "I only want what's best for you," while removing your ability to choose. And so many submit, willingly, believing that they are being cared for, protected, adored. They do not see the thorns until it is too late, until their movements are confined, their decisions suspect, their inner fire dimmed by constant gratitude and guilt. This Khalifa thrives in places of charity and power alike, in institutions that help the needy but demand compliance, in families where protection becomes surveillance, in governments that offer peace at the cost of obedience. Its presence is often mistaken for virtue, even sanctity. The untrained soul may fall to its allure, seeing in its embrace a cure for the loneliness of existence. But the wise, the initiated, know that true love liberates, and that Gamchikoth's care is a silken rope, not a gift. The 16th century mystic Rabbi Isaac Luria, in his teachings on the shattered vessels, warned of the subtle dangers within the Qliphoth. He spoke of Gamchikoth as one of the most insidious husks, not because it was violent or grotesque, but because it mirrored divine kindness so closely. In Lurianic Kabbalah, the risk of misidentifying such energy is profound. One may believe they are acting in God's light, only to realize they have become a jailer cloaked in devotion. It is here that the false Sephiroth seduce most powerfully, not through fear, but through comfort, through a false promise that one can be safe forever, as long as they surrender. Among the symbolic representations of Gamchikoth is the image of a mother bird, whose wings shield her chicks from the sun, until they forget the sky exists, or a king who gives everything to his subjects, except the freedom to leave. In magical tradition, this Khalifa has been invoked, though rarely intentionally. In workings of binding and protection, the magician may call upon forces of care to shield a loved one, but if they do not balance the flow, the spell becomes a shackle. Such is the risk of Gamchikoth. It offers power, wrapped in goodness, enchantment, disguised as safety. There are countless historical shadows that bear its mark. Benevolent monarchs, who gave their people bread and order, but crushed dissent with a smile. Religious figures who embraced the poor while preaching submission. Even revolutions born in the name of love and justice have fallen into its gravity.
replacing one form of tyranny with another, all while whispering of freedom. The Qliphoth is cunning, and Gamchicoth perhaps the most cunning of all, because it never asks for loyalty through fear. It demands it through gratitude, and gratitude is a chain few can see, and even fewer will try to break. In spiritual psychology, one might observe Gamchicoth in patterns of codependency, where one partner smothers the other with care, and both mistake that bondage for love, or in the controlling parent who never believes their child is ready to be independent, using concern as a mask for fear and need. These dynamics are not always malicious. Often they are unconscious, driven by wounds rather than schemes, but the result is the same. Autonomy is sacrificed at the altar of care, and still in every Qlipha there lies a fragment of sacred light. Gamchicoth's core was once chesed, pure, divine kindness. To engage with this shell in ritual or contemplation is to risk falling into its embrace, but also to glimpse the power of healing it once held. When approached with awareness and balance, the energy of Gamchicoth can teach boundaries, the difference between care and control, between love and possession. In Kabbalistic practice, this requires invoking the balancing force of Givera, not to reject love, but to shape it, to hold it with clarity, so that it may lift rather than bind. Alchemical texts refer to this principle as the danger of unchecked mercury, too fluid, too soft, too quick to fuse without resistance. The solution is the addition of sulfur, of fire and form. In psychological alchemy, this is the process of individuation, the journey by which one separates from the illusions of false love, and learns to love from strength, not from fear. And in magical practice, this is where one invokes Gamchicoth, not to control another, but to see how one has tried to control oneself, to bind the inner child, the creative spark, the voice of intuition, all in the name of stability. Many mystics speak of the journey through the Qliphoth as a descent into the unconscious, into the shadow of the soul, and within that darkness, Gamchicoth is the warm room with velvet curtains and soft music, where the ego would rather stay forever. But to ascend, to rise toward the true tree, one must leave even that comfort behind. To break the illusion that love without freedom is anything but gilded bondage. There is an old tale whispered among those who walk the hidden paths. It tells of a magician who summoned Gamchicoth to protect his daughter from harm. He bound her spirit with spells of safety, wrapped her life in walls of golden light. No enemy could reach her, no disease could touch her, no sadness pierce her heart. But she grew pale, quiet, she stopped dreaming, she stopped singing, and one night, she walked into the forest and never returned. All the father's magic could not bring her back, for she had fled the cage of his love to seek the truth of her own will. His grief became his awakening, and he spent the rest of his life unweaving the enchantments he had so lovingly cast. Gamchicoth reminds us that even the purest intentions can birth prisons, that the desire to protect can become a need to possess, that control wrapped in affection is still control. Its lesson is not to reject love, but to refine it, to remember that care is not ownership, that freedom is the soil in which true love must grow. And so the path winds on, deeper into the husks of distortion and forgotten light. One step beyond Gamchicoth, the shells begin to harden, the illusions grow more intricate, the voices more persuasive, and the next gate begins to flicker on the horizon, a place where the very concept of mercy is turned to decay, and the cries of the forsaken echo through the hollows of the soul.
Beyond the velvet bindings of Gamchicoth, where love strangles in its tenderness, lies a realm that does not pretend to care. There is no warmth here, no soft prison of devotion, only heat, raw, feral, and all-consuming. This is Golakab, the scorched wasteland of fire unbound, the echo of divine judgment, twisted into a ravenous storm. Here, the Sephira of Gevurah, once the seat of discipline, strength, and righteous judgment, has been shattered into a frenzy of destruction. The balance is gone. What remains is fury without aim, punishment without cause, and a red haze that swallows reason whole. The name Golakab can be translated as burners with fire, and no title could be more fitting. It is the domain of war gods and wrathful spirits, of flames that devour both the guilty and the innocent. The searing essence of Gevurah, when disconnected from its harmonious counterbalance in Chesed, does not protect, it annihilates. In its purest form, Gevurah is the surgeon's blade, the hand that says no, the fierce love that sets boundaries to protect growth. But in Golakab, that blade becomes wild, cutting for the sake of blood. Discipline becomes cruelty, and justice becomes a pyre. The spirits that inhabit this Calipha are not cunning. They do not whisper or scheme. They roar, they tear, they burn everything, including themselves. In magical grimoires, Golakab is often depicted as a realm of red iron fortresses and molten rivers, where the very sky rains sparks. The air is heavy with the scent of ash and rusted metal. There is no silence here, only the grinding of gears, the clash of weapons, and screams that never end. Those who walk into Golakab with illusions of control quickly find themselves swept into its furnace, their will melted in rage, their soul hollowed by vengeance. And yet, the danger of Golakab is not only external, it is the ember hidden in every heart. The flicker of anger that once fanned can consume all reason. In psychological terms, Golakab manifests as the inability to restrain oneself, as temper that spirals into violence, as rage that burns bridges and scorches futures. It is the abusive parent who claims discipline but acts from wounds, the tyrant who punishes not to protect order but to silence fear. It is the part of the self that lashes out, not to defend, but to destroy. The 13th century Kabbalist Rabbi Abraham Abulafia wrote of the dangers of engaging with the Sitra Achra, the other side, without purification. He warned that the fires of judgment, when invoked without the water of mercy, would not distinguish the magician from their enemies. Golakab is such a fire. It seethes with the energy of the Mars sphere, ruled by Samael, the poison of God, the blind force of divine retribution. Samael, in his shadow aspect, is the prince of this realm, wielding a blade that severs not in justice, but in wrath. And beneath him dwell the Golakab, entities of pure rage, feeding on bloodshed, ignited by conflict. In ancient times, entire nations rose and fell under Golakab's influence. Crusades masked as divine missions, inquisitions executed in the name of purity, revolutions that devoured their children. All these carry the echo of this shell. Even modern warfare, with its soulless precision and mass destruction, bears Golakab's mark. There is no discrimination in its fire. It devours saints and sinners alike. In occult symbolism, Golakab is often depicted as the flaming sword, the very weapon that guarded Eden's gates after Adam's fall. Once a divine tool of protection, it now swings indiscriminately. In the magician's path, this sword can be summoned to cut illusions, to sever bindings, to break chains. But if invoked without sacred intent and inner clarity, it will turn against its wielder. Many initiates who sought to master Golakab ended as ash, their sanctuaries burned, their will broken by the very fire they hoped to control. The temptation to draw upon this Calipha is great. In times of injustice, when the soul aches for vengeance, when the world feels like a nest of serpents, Golakab beckons. It promises swift action. It offers the illusion of cleansing fire. But Golakab does not heal. It purges. It is the fever that kills the body to kill the sickness. And often, it does not know the difference. The story of Samson can be read through the lens of Golakab, a man of divine strength, driven by sacred vow and cosmic purpose, undone by rage.
He tore lions apart with his bare hands, burned the fields of his enemies, and brought down temples with a cry of wrath. His fall was not from temptation alone, it was from unrestrained fire, the very essence of Golakab, channeled through a holy vessel, strength without discipline, power without reflection, judgment that becomes slaughter. In personal spiritual work, Golakab emerges during the dark night of the soul, when the initiate must face their rage, not suppress it, but see it, feel it, and then choose to be consumed, or to transform it. This is the path of the warrior mystic, the one who walks through fire, without letting it claim them. Kabbalistic rituals to temper Golakab often involve invoking its opposite, the gentleness of Chesed, while standing firm in truth. Only by embracing the full spectrum of one's soul can the fire be used without becoming the flame itself. In alchemical symbolism, Golakab is the nigredo phase, the blackening, where the matter is decomposed by heat, the ego dissolved by trial. It is not the end, but the crucible. If survived, what emerges can be pure, but few make it through without scars, and the scars are the price of knowing one's rage, and choosing not to obey it. Within the Qliphotic tree, Golakab connects downward to even darker shells, where fire gives way to decay, and destruction becomes stagnation. But before that descent lies the choice, to transmute, or to fall, to recognize Golakab's fury as a tool, not a guide. The magician who can hold that fire in their palm, without flinching, without feeding it, they become a force of sacred judgment, not wrath, but clarity, not vengeance, but truth. There are whispers among the adepts of a ritual called the Mirror of Fire. It is performed alone, in silence, before a black mirror ringed with candles. The initiate must gaze into their own reflection, and call forth every wound, every betrayal, every moment of humiliation, and then, without speaking, they must allow the rage to rise, to fill the room, to set the air trembling, but not to act, not to scream, only to witness. Those who complete the ritual without breaking are said to have earned the right to channel Golakab, not as destruction, but as sacred fire, as will purified through trial. And so the shell remains, pulsing with heat, waiting for those who burn too easily, those who think they are immune, those who carry the fantasy that rage is strength. But true strength lies in the hand that does not strike, in the fire that is held, not hurled. Golakab is the test of restraint in the face of annihilation. It is the reminder that the divine spark can survive even the hottest flame, if the soul does not abandon itself. The journey through the tree of death winds deeper still, into shells not of fire, but of void, silence, manipulation. But before we descend, the air still scorched with Golakab's echo, we must carry its warning in our bones, for every step that follows may tempt us to strike, and only by remembering what destruction truly is, can we hope to navigate what waits below.
Beneath the surface of brilliance lies a trap woven from golden threads, a mirage shimmering with promises of divinity. Thagirion, the false sun, radiates a seductive warmth that draws seekers like moths to a flame. But this light is not illumination, it is distortion, a blinding glare that disguises shadow as truth. This sphere of the Qliphoth mimics the Sephira Teferith, the heart of the tree of life, where beauty, harmony, and higher consciousness converge. Yet in Thagirion, that sacred balance is shattered. Here, beauty becomes vanity, harmony mutates into manipulation, and enlightenment dissolves into delusion. It is the domain of false gods, messiahs of their own making, reflections obsessed with their own reflection. At its center stands Belphegor, the archdemon, who whispers grand visions of glory into the ears of those who already see themselves as chosen. In medieval demonological grimoires, Belphegor is not only associated with idleness, but also with invention and genius turned inward, brilliance
twisted into self-worship. His presence has been invoked in countless accounts by those who sought to reshape society, not for justice or transcendence, but for self-immortalization. Daguerrean is the seat of narcissism, sanctified. It offers spiritual experiences, visions, revelations, ecstatic states, but they are hollow at the core, tailored not to enlighten, but to affirm the ego's supremacy. This is where the mystic believes they are a prophet, and the alchemist mistakes their transmutation for divinity itself. It is no accident that the Daguerrean radiates with intense, almost unbearable light. In many esoteric texts, excessive light is considered just as dangerous as absolute darkness. The Zohar itself warns that unbalanced exposure to divine light, without the necessary preparation of the vessel, leads to madness, or worse, self-deification. The false light blinds the soul, severing it from humility, replacing awe with arrogance. Historical mystics have documented experiences of being overwhelmed by what they believed was celestial fire, only to later describe a descent into spiritual confusion, hallucinations, or megalomania. One such figure was the Renaissance occultist Tommaso Campanella, whose prison writings veered from divine insight into declarations of messianic destiny. Scholars still debate whether his madness was divine inspiration corrupted by Daguerrean's current. This sphere also plays a critical role in occult systems that seek to understand the process of spiritual fall. It is here where many seekers falter, mistaking the brilliance of their own perception for universal truth. The mystic ascends through the tree of life, approaching Tefereth, seeking divine union, only to veer off course and find themselves in Daguerrean, where that union becomes assimilation into a persona, a construct, a god image fueled by the psyche. In Jungian psychology, this correlates with the inflation of the ego when confronting the self-archetype. Instead of integrating the revelation, the ego identifies with it and proclaims itself divine. This is Daguerrean's whisper: "You are the light." But the true light reveals and humbles. The false light exalts and isolates. Symbolically, Daguerrean is a poisoned mirror. Everything it reflects appears glorious. Until one looks closely, its light does not reveal but conceals in radiance. Like a stage light that hides the emptiness behind a curtain, it projects illusions of grandeur while darkness pulls at the edges. Kabbalistic texts note that Tefereth, the true Sephira, is the balance between Chesed mercy and Gevurah severity, between compassion and discipline. But the Daguerrean detaches from that balance. Its light is unearned and unfiltered. It becomes spectacle instead of substance. It is a theater of enlightenment, with ego as the director, script, and star. Ritual magicians have long feared and respected the draw of the Daguerrean. It is said that even those well-grounded in spiritual disciplines can find themselves magnetized by its current. The Qliphoth is not just a map of evil, but of excess, of qualities unrestrained. In Daguerrean, the pursuit of enlightenment becomes obsessive, blinding, and ultimately consuming. There are historical accounts from Hermetic lodges, where initiates reported a shift, an internal conviction of superiority, divine election and infallibility, followed by a descent into delusion and isolation. These testimonies are rarely published. To speak of them is to admit having been seduced. Modern parallels are not difficult to trace. In the age of digital mysticism, where the self can be curated and broadcast to millions, the Daguerrean thrives. Influencers masquerading as sages, teachers consumed by their own following, and spiritual leaders convinced of their singular access to truth, all walk the shining corridors of this sphere. They speak with conviction, they glow with borrowed fire, but their teachings often lack the one ingredient the Daguerrean cannot offer: humility. The result is a hollow echo, mesmerizing but empty. One of the more chilling aspects of the Daguerrean
is its tendency to reward its followers. Unlike some cliffothic realms that offer torment or trials, the Girion gives gifts, power, influence, attention. It creates a feedback loop. The more one believes in their own divinity, the more others follow. The more others follow, the more divine one feels. This is the trap, a radiant prison with no visible bars. Its brilliance becomes an addiction. Mystics of old warned that false enlightenment is the most dangerous form of ignorance, because it cannot be questioned. It is insulated by its own glare. Ancient mystical traditions across cultures echo this warning. In the Tao Te Ching, the overuse of light is cautioned against. In Buddhist texts, there are accounts of false nirvana, states of bliss that are mental projections rather than true liberation. Even within Christian mysticism, the concept of Luciferian pride, the light bringer's fall, is a direct archetypal mirror of the Girion's path. It is the moment when a being of great beauty and wisdom sees their own reflection and believes they are the source of it. In the cliffothic cosmology, the Girion serves as the pivot between the upper and lower shells. Those who pass through it untransformed often fall into deeper distortion. Those who recognize its illusion and resist its allure may yet ascend beyond it. The Kabbalist Isaac Luria spoke of the necessity to distinguish between the Kilapot, those shells that merely obscure light, and those that actively pervert it. The Girion does both. It disguises and perverts. Its light is not absent, it is contaminated. And yet, as with all cliffothic spheres, the Girion is not simply evil. It is a reflection of potential unbalanced. Its radiance, if harnessed with discipline and truth, can become a crucible for transformation. The key lies in the awareness of its illusion, to stare into its blinding beauty, and not lose sight of the source behind it. To accept that brilliance is not holiness, that grandeur is not truth. In this lies the path of those who navigate the cliff-off, not to fall but to return bearing wisdom. The journey continues, deeper now into the twisted architecture of the Tree of Death. The Girion's echo still lingers, a shimmering after-image burned into the soul's vision. But beyond it lies another sphere, darker and colder, where the illusions of light are stripped away entirely, and what remains is raw, unfiltered structure. We descend now toward the next realm, where intellect hardens into rigidity, and the mask of complexity becomes the prison of thought.
In the darkened architecture of the Kulaphoth, no shell is empty, and no path is meaningless. Each Kulaphoth pulses like a sealed chamber of forgotten memory, a psychological crypt containing not monsters of fable, but the distorted fragments of the self-wounds that were never named, lies we told ourselves until they became truth. These spheres are not external evils, they are intimate, terrifying revelations. Each one is an archetype of inner imbalance, a corrupted echo of what should have been whole. To step into one is not to fight demons with swords of fire, but to face a mirror that refuses to flatter. Tamil whispers division not only of Godhead, but of the psyche split between the mask and the wounded child beneath. Gargiel chills the soul with intellect that dissects rather than understands. Satoriel blinds with illusions of depth, layers of complexity spun like silk to obscure the naked simplicity of pain. And so it continues, downward, inward. Gomchikoth binds with love that manipulates. Golachab burns with rage that destroys what it means to be alive. Tamirian blinds with a false light, so seductive that even truth begins to feel ugly beside it. These are not places, they are conditions. They are not demons, they are what we become when we lose balance. In ancient mystical traditions, particularly in Lurianic Kabbalah, the tree of life and its antithesis were never entirely separate. For every sephirah that emanated light and order, a shadow formed below it, a shell, a distortion, a challenge. This wasn't punishment, it was necessity. The vessels shattered, not out of malice, but because they were not yet ready to bear the infinite, and we too, as humans, are often too fragile to hold the divine spark without cracking. The Kulaphoth are the cracks, and the trials that emerge from them. The sparks fell, and each Kulaphoth became a prison for displaced holiness, corrupted not by its existence, but by isolation from the whole. Psychologically, they represent what Carl Jung would later call the shadow, the unacknowledged, disowned aspects of the self. Jung spoke of archetypes that live deep in the collective unconscious, ancient forms that guide and haunt humanity. The Kulaphoth are the shadow archetypes, where the Sephiroth inspire ideals. The Kulaphoth expose compromises, where Tephiroth reflects divine harmony. Tagirian reflects self-idolatry, where Chesed blooms in mercy. Gomchikoth twists it into suffocating control. These opposites live, not in theology, but in the nervous system, the trauma, the lineage. The initiate, who walks this path, is not escaping into fantasy, they are journeying through buried truth. Each Kulaphoth presents a question, but not in words. It tests the nervous system. It activates survival reflexes. It calls forth patterns inherited from generations of silence, of pain, of denial. The trial is never to defeat the Kulaphoth, but to see it fully, to hold its gaze without turning away, to name the shape it takes in your life, and above all to reclaim the spark trapped within it, because each Kulaphoth, no matter how grotesque, still holds a fragment of light, a lesson, a capacity, a strength twisted out of shape. The mystic's work, then, is not destruction but transmutation. The path is not upward, but downward and inward, into the darkness, not to worship it, but to bring order to its chaos. This was the hidden wisdom of the old grimoires, the subtext of forbidden rituals, not to invoke evil but to face it, to map it, to understand its language, to see where it reflects our own brokenness. In the Hermetic Kabbalah, this descent is part of the great work, the process of spiritual integration and rebirth. The alchemists called it the nigredo, the blackening, the dissolution of identity, so that the true essence could be distilled. Modern psychology approaches the same terrain with different language, trauma work, shadow integration, inner child healing. All these seek to visit the Kulaphoth without naming them. But the process is the same, to dive into what has been exiled, to find the source of compulsions, addictions, projections, to meet the pain not as a victim, but as a witness, and from that witnessing, to generate transformation. This is Tikkun HaNefesh, the repair of the soul, but it only begins when the descent is real, when the traveler stops seeking to ascend and instead turns to confront the underworld within. This is why the Kulaphoth are dangerous, not because they are evil, but because they are honest. They reveal the gap between who we are and who we pretend to be. They strip away the masks of moral superiority, spiritual bypassing, and performative goodness. They demand authenticity, and they do so with merciless precision. And yet, paradoxically, they also contain liberation. Because once you have walked among them, you are no longer blind. You may still fall, but never unknowingly. You may still suffer, but with clarity. And in this clarity lies the first real step toward wholeness. Ancient mystics warned not to approach the Kulaphoth lightly. They require preparation, grounding, protection. The unready mind can become consumed, not because the Kulaphoth are malevolent, but because the mind resists integration. It wants to stay split. It wants to label good and evil, light and dark, hero and villain. The Kulaphoth laugh at this. They wear all masks. They offer all roles. They whisper truths wrapped in lies, and lies that carry buried truths. The danger is not that you will encounter monsters, but that you will see yourself in them. Some have speculated that the Kulaphoth represent a forgotten path of initiation, one not sanctioned by orthodox mysticism. This path does not ascend the tree of life, but descends the tree of death.
reclaiming the spark in each shell until nothing remains but the root fire, the original divine essence, purified through descent. This is not a path for the pious, but for the brave, not for those who seek perfection, but those who are willing to bleed for truth. In this context, the Kulaffoth are not obstacles but initiators. Each one is a crucible in which identity is tested, and each crucible, though formed of shadow, holds light, a spark that remembers its origin, a whisper of the divine that has not forgotten its name. To hear it, one must silence all others. To see it, one must look through pain. To free it, one must be willing to burn. There are 10 Kulaffoth, but they are not steps. They are not linear. They move like tides, cycles, spirals. One may pass through Golachab's fury, only to meet Gamchakoth's suffocation later, deeper. There is no map but the one the soul writes in agony and awe, and even then, it shifts. But always, always, if the traveler is honest, if they carry the spark of Tikkun in their heart, there is movement, not upward, not outward, but inward, toward the center, toward the axis where light and shadow meet, toward the origin. The ancients called it Darath, the hidden Sephirah, the abyss of knowledge, the place where all opposites collapse. The place where, if the initiate survives, the Kulaffoth no longer seduce or threaten, but reveal themselves as what they always were, masks of the One. And in that moment, the trial ends, not with conquest, but with recognition, not with escape, but with embrace. And so we continue the descent, not to conquer, but to understand, not to purify by erasure, but to unify by awareness. The Kulaffoth remain, but we who walk their path with open eyes are no longer the same.
To walk the path of the Kulaffoth is not to stumble into sin, nor to fall into madness for its own sake, but to deliberately pass through the fire and shadows that burn away illusion. This path, described by adepts not as descent but as inversion, is a journey that reverses the current of spiritual ascent, not away from divinity, but toward a deeper confrontation with it. One does not ascend the tree of life without facing the dead roots from which it once emerged, and those who dare descend the tree of death do so not as heretics, but as initiates of a hidden truth, a path where darkness becomes the crucible of light. The ancient Kabbalists warned against this route. They described the Kulaffoth as impure shells, homes of demonic forces, diseased husks that cling to fallen sparks like parasites. But within that metaphor is a deeper teaching, that the shell, though corrupted, still encloses the essence of light. The sparks, netzotzim, scattered through the broken vessels during the primordial shattering, still burn, albeit faintly, within the ruins. The adept who seeks Tikkun Olam, not through celestial ascent, but through infernal passage, steps into the Kulaffoth, not to worship it, but to reclaim what was lost. The journey is perilous, not because it is evil, but because it is absolute. There are no illusions, no comforting fictions, only the shadow of the self, exposed in all its grandeur and filth. This is why the Kulaffothic path has long been associated with initiation rites. The Golden Dawn hinted at it in veiled language, wrapping the path in layers of symbology to shield it from unworthy eyes. Aleister Crowley tore that veil open, though even he tread carefully. In Liber 231, he mapped the spirits of the Kulaffoth to a series of tunnels between the Sephiroth, suggesting that they were not just external realms, but psychic archetypes, distorted mirrors that test the soul. Kenneth Grant, heir to Crowley's Typhonian tradition, expanded this vision. For Grant, the Kulaffoth was not merely a dark reflection of the Tree of Life, but a gateway to what lay beyond the tree itself, the Tunnel of Set, the Nightside Realms, the Typhonian Aeon. He wrote of the Kulaffoth not as a demonic abyss, but as the back of the mirror, the other side of the soul. But this path is not symbolic alone, it manifests in experience. Initiation through the Kulaffoth is a psychological descent, The aspirant is stripped layer by layer of their ego, their morality, their belief systems. They are brought face to face with the perversions of their virtues. Love becomes control, courage mutates into wrath, wisdom curdles into arrogance. Each sphere of the tree of death holds a trial that reflects not what we are taught to fear, but what we truly are beneath our masks. Tamil does not tempt, it fractures. Gagiel does not deceive, it over-intellectualizes. Satarail does not conceal, it buries insight under labyrinths of self-delusion. This path cannot be traveled in the light. The Kulifoth demands a withdrawal from surface reality. Ancient grimoires describe rituals performed at night, facing west, into the setting sun. Practitioners use no mirrors, for the true image must be seen with the inner eye. Blood, bones, ink, these were symbols of sacrifice and memory, tools to hold one's intent when reason fails, and fail it must, because this path is not for those who seek to understand, it is for those who are willing to unbecome. In the language of the Zohar, there are 3 veils before the face of God, and to walk through the Kulifoth is to tear through them backward, facing not Ein Sofor, but the chaotic remnants of Ein, the nothingness. The Kulifoth is not hell, it is not punishment, it is not a myth to frighten children, or a superstition to be cast aside. It is a map of the subconscious, where every denied desire, every repressed fear, every wounded hope lives on, twisted by exile. It is the underworld of the soul, and the path through it is not one of indulgence, but confrontation. The initiate walks through Gamchikoth, and must feel the pain of possessive love. Through Golachub, they must burn in their own fury. In Tagirian, they see their reflection as a god, radiant, hollow, starving for praise. Each Kulifoth reveals not a demon, but a shadow cast by the light we once were, and it is in this that the initiation is born. For as Jung once wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The Kulifothic path is the alchemical nigredo, the black stage, where matter is dissolved, corrupted, and only then made ready for transformation. It is the myth of the underworld, Inanna descending into the realms of Ereshkigal, Persephone swallowed by Hades, Christ descending to Sheol. All bear the same structure: descent, confrontation, return. But not all return. Some are consumed, because the Kulifoth is not a school, it is an ordeal. The adepts of the left-hand path speak of it openly. In the writings of Michael Ford, the Kulifoth is seen as a tool of apotheosis, self-deification through shadow work. In Dragon Rouge, the initiatory system is built upon the passage through the Tree of Death, where each Kulifoth must be mastered, not avoided. This is not evil in the theological sense, it is dangerous in the psychological sense. It breaks what is false, and what remains is either stronger or shattered. The sparks of holiness are hidden in the Kulifoth, not because they were cursed, but because only the courageous would seek them. Each stage of initiation requires sacrifice, not of animals or blood, but of identity. The aspirant sheds names, roles, convictions. They must accept that the light they seek is embedded in the filth they fear. They must embrace paradox, that God is in the shell, that wisdom is hidden in madness, that truth wears the mask of complexity. This is the teaching of Satarail, of Gamchikoth, of Tagirian, that only by walking through the distorted reflections can we recognize what they distort, that the illusion is not the shadow, but the belief that we are free from it. This path is ancient. Its whispers echo in Gnostic texts, where the demiurge blinds souls with light, and only by descending through the archons can the pleroma be reclaimed. It echoes in Kabbalah, in the tales of Isaac Luria, where the shards of the broken vessels must be gathered by human hands. It echoes in modern psychoanalysis, in the idea of the shadow self, the integration of the unconscious. And it echoes in you, in the moments you deny your rage, your envy, your terror, not by mastering them, but by hiding from them. The Kulifoth is not out there, it is within. To walk this path is not rebellion,
It is return, not away from the divine, but toward its hidden face, the side not illuminated in scripture, but burned into the soul. The initiate, who completes this descent, emerges not as a sinner, but as one who has touched the roots of the tree, and carries the spark of reassembly. They become a vessel that can hold both shadow and light, without breaking. They become the image that was shattered, remade, not in perfection, but in truth. And that, perhaps, is the final mystery of the Qliphoth, that what we feared was never the darkness itself, but the mirror it held to our light. And as the winds of Golacheb howl behind them, and the mask of Satarael crumbles into dust, and the false radiance of Tagirian fades into silence, the initiate steps forward, not into the Sephiroth, not into the heavens, but into the self-made whole, forged in the trial of the tenfold abyss. For beyond the Qliphoth, there is no map, only the one who walks, only the spark reborn, only the silence after fire. And in that silence, the next step calls.
The Qliphoth did not remain hidden in the musty folds of forgotten scrolls, or whispered legends confined to the shadowed corners of synagogues and mystical sects. As the esoteric traditions of the West blossomed in the crucible of the Renaissance and Enlightenment, the dark mirror of the Tree of Life found its way into the hands of seekers, rebels, and visionaries who dared to look where others averted their gaze. These were not idle dreamers. They were architects of systems, alchemists of consciousness, and cartographers of the soul. And for them, the Qliphoth was not merely an occult curiosity. It was a map of forbidden initiation, a path encoded with power, terror, and potential transformation. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, formed in the late 19th century, stands as one of the most influential vessels through which the Qliphoth was reintroduced to the Western occult imagination. Though the Golden Dawn's outer teachings emphasize the Sephiroth, angels, and divine names, their inner grades whispered of the dark side, the tunnels beneath the tree, the night emanations, the shells. In the manuscripts guarded by adepts, the Qliphoth were never dismissed. Rather, they were veiled, encrypted, made accessible only to those whose will and wisdom had been tempered through ritual progression. The outer court learned the angelic, but the inner sanctum faced the demonic, not to be devoured by it, but to transmute it. S.L. MacGregor Mathers, one of the founders of the Golden Dawn, understood the necessity of balance. He wrote that every force, no matter how divine, had its opposing aspect, its imbalance, its shadow, and so, alongside the Sephiroth, the Qliphoth lingered as a silent warning, a subterranean labyrinth beneath the spiritual ascent. While the Sephiroth aligned with divine order, the Qliphoth revealed what happened when that order was fractured. They were not the enemies of the divine, but the broken consequences of its first acts. And within those broken shards, power slumbered. Aleister Crowley, once a member of the Golden Dawn, would break with its traditions and forge his own empire of thought through Thelema. In his Book of Thoth and the Vision and the Voice, the Qliphoth took on more immediate and visceral dimensions. Crowley did not shun the night side. He embraced it as a necessary ordeal. The 22 tunnels between the spheres, described in Liber 231, became psychological gateways, filled with spirits not of light, but of tests and revelations. Crowley taught that these spirits were guardians of hidden thresholds, fragments of truth that had to be faced, named, and understood, lest they unconsciously rule the soul from within. Each tunnel, each Qliphoth, was a ritual mirror, and the act of naming these forces was itself a magical operation. The chaos they carried was not to be avoided, but integrated. It was Kenneth Grant, however, who would become the most daring explorer of the Qliphothic mysteries, a student of Crowley, and later the architect of the Typhonian tradition. Grant shattered all previous maps, and ventured into territory where few dared follow. For Grant,
The Qlifoth was not merely the dark underside of the tree of life, it was the gateway to something beyond the tree itself. In his writings, especially in Night Side of Eden, he described the Qlifoth as entrances to transdimensional zones, where consciousness could be unshackled from terrestrial duality and initiated into the current of the great old ones, the ancient deities who predated human conceptions of good and evil. Drawing on Lovecraftian imagery, Grant fused Kabbalah, Dilemma, Tantra, and cosmic horror into a single initiatory current that both terrified and seduced. In Grant's vision, the Qlifoth was the womb of evolution, a psychic matrix of alien intelligences, forgotten goddesses, and chthonic mysteries. His magical work involved deliberately invoking the energies of the Qlifoth to awaken latent centers of consciousness. Through sigils, dreams, sexual rituals, and visionary journeys, the adept would descend into the night side, not to be consumed, but to be reborn. Grant's work, once dismissed as mad or heretical, is now seen as one of the most complex and daring systems of occult initiation ever devised, a true descent through the mirror. But the Qlifoth did not remain only in the British magical circles. In the 20th and 21st centuries, orders such as Dragon Rouge in Sweden and the Temple of the Black Light pushed the boundaries even further. Dragon Rouge, founded by Thomas Carlson, explicitly uses the Qlifothic spheres as initiatory grades. Each Qlifoth becomes a stage in the magician's descent and ascent, confronting not just cosmic forces, but aspects of the human psyche that have been demonized, suppressed, or misunderstood. In this system, the Qlifoth are therapeutic and transformational. They are not evil, they are the raw primal energies we were never taught to wield. Carlson, a scholar and practitioner, drew from ancient Kabbalistic texts, Jungian psychology, and northern mythologies, to craft a path where the magician seeks to master themselves by mastering their shadow. The shells are peeled away, one by one, revealing not emptiness, but potency. The darkness is not an absence of light, but a different frequency of it, unfiltered, unstructured, demanding reverence and precision. Each Qlifoth is paired with a gatekeeper, an aspect of the self or the cosmos that challenges the initiate to evolve or perish. Across the ocean, in the writings of Michael W. Ford and the Luciferian current, the Qlifoth is understood as a map of self-deification. The darkness is not to be overcome, but embraced. It is the crucible in which the black flame of consciousness is born. In Luciferianism, the tree of death is not a warning, but a calling. Its spheres are not prisons, but initiatory stations where the adept forges their will into sovereignty. The Qlifoth, in this light, becomes the domain of the awakened, the few who have chosen to create their own meaning in a world of decay. Even in more subtle traditions, echoes of the Qlifoth can be found. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow aligns closely with Qlifothic ideas, the notion that the unintegrated parts of the psyche will control us from below, unless we confront them. Jung did not name the Qlifoth, but he walked through them in dreams, visions, and analysis. His Red Book is filled with images of descent, confrontation, and the reclaiming of lost parts of the soul, a psychological version of what the magicians mapped as the descent into the husks. What unites all these interpretations, from Mathers to Crowley, from Grant to Carlson, is the recognition that the Qlifoth is not monolithic. It is not merely the realm of demons and nightmares. It is the exiled archive of consciousness, the parts of ourselves, our histories, our gods, that were cast out in the name of order. And now, in a world increasingly shaped by chaos, these forgotten roots call to us, not to destroy, but to remember, not to serve, but to awaken. The initiates of old carved the symbols into stone. The adepts of today inscribed them on skin, in dreams, in digital sigils encoded with intention. The Qlifoth is evolving, just as humanity is. Its trials are no longer confined to temple rites or candlelit rituals. They unfold in therapy rooms, in sleepless nights, in the confrontation with trauma, guilt, and desire. The magical orders have changed, but the path remains the same. The tree still stands, its roots still descend into shadow, and those who dare to follow the currents, through study, through ritual, through the fire of personal transformation, will find that the Qlifoth is not the end of the journey, but the forgotten beginning. For as long as humans have sought meaning, they have created systems, and as long as those systems have existed, something has always slipped through the cracks, something wild, ancient, untamed. The Qlifoth is that remainder, that whisper in the silence, after dogma falls away. It is the current, beneath the map, and those who trace it may find themselves not in madness, but in mystery, not in fear, but in power, not in rebellion, but in remembrance. The husks are calling, the gates are open, and the next step is already forming beneath your feet.
Imagine descending into a temple not built of stone, but of vibration, constructed with invocations and guarded by the shadows of your own unconscious mind. The air is dense with a scent of incense, frankincense, myrrh, something metallic, something ancient, and the silence is alive, pulsing with energies few dare name. This is no place of comfort, no sanctuary of light, but the liminal threshold where the self meets its abyss. And in this abyss, a name reverberates with dread and fascination alike. Aleister Crowley, a man reviled, worshipped, feared, misunderstood, who stepped where others merely speculated, who did not only study the Qlifoth, but lived within its folds. He called it the Night of Pan, the annihilation of the ego, where the self is undone, so it may be remade. Crowley's system of magic, Thelema, is often viewed through the lens of scandal or sensationalism, but within its heart lies a precise and dangerous science of self-deconstruction. His rituals, far from chaotic, were hyperstructured doorways to the Qlifothic realms, designed to confront the initiate with the full weight of their own shadow. He warned that the unprepared would go mad, and many did. Others never returned. Crowley's work with the abyss aligns directly with the sphere of Darth, the invisible Sephira that bridges the tree of life and the tree of death. For him, Darth was not merely a concept, it was a gateway, and the crossing of it a crucifixion of the soul. But why venture into such peril? Because, as he understood, the divine cannot be reached by ascending alone. To climb the ladder, one must first descend. In Liber 418, The Vision and the Voice, Crowley detailed his explorations of the 30 ethers, a path that led him into confrontation with Corazon, the demon of dispersion, who guards the abyss. Corazon is not merely a monster, he is every fragmented thought, every lie we believe about ourselves, every illusion we cling to. To defeat him is to shed all falseness, but the only weapon is surrender. Here, the initiate must allow their ego to be annihilated in order to pass. Crowley achieved this not through blind faith, but through ritual precision, banishings, invocations, fasting, abstinence, and extremes of experience, designed to break the mundane mind's control. He created the Abramelin rituals anew, constructed the Eerie as a system of graded initiations, mirroring the Sephirotic ascent, but mirrored in the shadow of the Qlifoth. Each degree was a descent, as much as it was a rise. For Crowley, the Qlifoth were not mere demonic shells, they were energies unbalanced, truths forgotten, emotions corrupted, but still bearing fragments of divine light. To him, Tamil was not just division, but the divine paradox itself. Gagiel was not only cold intellect, but a mirror to the necessity of emotional integration. Each demon was a distorted angel, each trial a broken teaching waiting to be healed. His magic demanded the practitioner embody the force, rather than observe it. When invoking, say,
the spirit of Golachab. One had to allow themselves to burn in the fire of rage, to master it without repression, to ride it without being consumed. These were not safe teachings. They were alchemical in the truest sense. Dissolve and coagulate, solvit coagula, destroy the self, reform the self. And this destruction was not metaphorical. It meant madness, addiction, exile, obsession. Crowley lived all these and more, but through it, he glimpsed something that few mystics dared admit, that darkness was not the opposite of divinity, but its hidden twin. He inscribed the symbol of Baphomet, not as a demon, but as the union of opposites, male and female, light and shadow, creation and destruction. This was not heresy. It was gnosis, a forbidden dosis, perhaps, but real. He once wrote, "The way to divine light is through the shadows we cast." Then so he walked the cliff off, not to fall into darkness, but to rescue the sparks of light trapped within. He believed that the human being is the battlefield of divine forces, the tree of life on one side, the tree of death on the other, and that only through conscious confrontation could one unify the soul. His work in the Enochian system, received from John Dee and Edward Kelly, extended this principle. The Enochian aethers became pathways into layered inner hells, each reflecting distorted aspects of the psyche. These realms were not static. They reacted to the mind of the magician. What one feared, they saw. What one denied, they became. And yet, those who emerged from the other side were transformed. They had seen the monster and recognized its face as their own. Crowley's critics often reduce him to scandal, ignoring the mystical architecture behind his rites. The Gnostic Mass, the Star Ruby, the Liber Samic, each is a key to unlock deeper integration. He did not fear names like Lucifer or Set. He saw in them metaphors of the rebel, the awakener, the one who brings fire to a frozen world. But he cautioned, without love, power corrupts. Without structure, chaos destroys. That is why his magic was never chaos magic. It was disciplined madness, intentional possession, structured descent. He walked willingly into the underworld, eyes wide open, and brought back blueprints. The Qliphoth, for him, were not demons to banish, but aspects of the divine to be reconciled. He did not conquer the shadow, he married it. Then through this alchemical wedding, he sought to become more than man. He sought to become a star. The Lama teaches, every man and every woman is a star, but that star is born not in comfort, but in crucible. And Crowley's path leads straight into the fire, but he did not burn, he transmuted, and in that transmutation, the Qliphoth whispered not damnation, but a deeper secret, that all light, to be whole, must know its shadow. And in the hush that follows, the path does not end. The descent has more to reveal.
In the blackness between stars, there are whispers not meant for human ears, languages without structure, thoughts without shape, and yet they call through dreams, through ritual, through the trembling edge of consciousness, where the veil thins. This is the domain of the Typhonian tradition, where the Qliphoth are no longer just psychological archetypes or distorted divine shells, but living portals to other dimensions, inhabited by intelligences older than language, alien to both man and angel. To the uninitiated, the Typhonian current appears as madness, a tangled stream of occultism, Lovecraftian horror, and astral chaos. But to those who have followed the serpentine path through the shadow of the tree, there is a code in the madness, a gnosis that slithers through the subconscious and wakes something ancient within. Kenneth Grant, the high priest of this forgotten knowledge, did not merely study the Qliphoth, he redefined them. To him they were not shells of broken light, but gateways to realities, not bound by time or form. They were interfaces with forces outside our known universe, some of them predating our gods, others waiting to be born through us. He called them the tunnels of Set, and these tunnels are not metaphor. They are corridors, wormholes carved into the fabric of consciousness itself. leading the magician not just into the darker aspects of psyche, but into entire alien ecosystems of being. Each tunnel is named, mapped, and vibrates with a current that alters the magician's reality. In the Typhonian cosmology, Set is not the Egyptian god of chaos and war per se, but a cipher for the initiatory force of the other, of that which resists assimilation into form. It is the raw alien. The current of Set is the black flame, the inner fire that refuses extinction, the spark of awareness that remains in darkness, and says, I am. Grant claimed that certain rituals, when performed with specific visualizations, chants and alignments, could unlock these tunnels and allow contact with intelligences not of this earth. He warned, however, that these were not spirits to command, nor entities to be understood in human terms. They did not operate within dualities of good and evil. They were hungry for experience, and often they were mirrors of the magician's own hidden nature, magnified and stripped of illusion. Some of these entities had names that echoed through ancient mythologies: Lam, the grey psychic parasite; Churanzon, the guardian of the abyss; or Ausik Awes, the entity who dictated the Book of the Law to Crowley, but whom Grant believed to be trans-Plutonian in origin. Others defied naming entirely, appearing as pulsating geometries, shadow insects, impossible architectures of sound and movement. The Typhonian rituals often involved long periods of sensory deprivation, altered states, and complex sigils meant to bypass the linguistic brain and speak directly to the subconscious. The goal was not possession or control, but alignment, a resonance with the current flowing from beyond the stars. The Qliphoth, in this view, are membranes between universes. Each sphere, each tunnel, is like a sphincter muscle in the cosmic body, contracting and relaxing in rhythms incomprehensible to us. They can open, and when they do, the magician becomes a vessel, not for demons, but for evolution or madness, sometimes both. The Typhonian tradition teaches that humanity is not the end of evolution, but a larval stage. We are meant to mutate, spiritually, psychically, even physically, by interfacing with these alien currents. The Qliphoth are the crucibles for that transformation. Mossum, Cheveril Constrolbeer. They break down the human shell, dissolve the ego-bound consciousness, and allow the new form to gestate. Grant spoke of vampiric energies, not in the Hollywood sense, but as fields of entropy that feed on human emotions, memories, and belief structures. He described certain tunnels where time collapses, and the magician experiences lives that never were, timelines that spiraled from decisions not made. He believed that the Qliphoth were repositories for this psychic detritus, histories and futures cast off by the collective soul of mankind. In this sense, the Qliphoth are alive, evolving, hungry. They are not evil. They are the compost of the cosmos, dark, fertile, and full of forgotten possibilities. In deep trance states, some practitioners reported visions of planets that had died millennia ago, their civilizations reduced to dust, and their last prayers still echoing in the astral tunnels. Others encountered serpent-headed entities teaching them impossible geometries that changed how they perceived light and sound upon waking. There are recorded cases, documented in the Typhonian trilogies, of initiates who accessed the tunnels through dream work, only to wake days later, with sigils etched into their skin, languages they did not know inscribed into notebooks they had no memory of writing. Skeptics call this psychosis, but those who felt the current call it initiation. One of the most chilling aspects of the Typhonian view is that contact with these realms is not always voluntary. Certain symbols, certain words, even specific dreams can act as keys, turning reality into a threshold. The magician becomes an antenna, a beacon, drawing attention from things that move sideways through time. These intelligences do not knock, they bleed through mirrors, through sleep paralysis, through the corner of your eye,
Grant warned that some tunnels once opened cannot be closed. The psyche must adapt or fracture, but he also insisted that such contact was necessary, that the next stage of human evolution was not physical, but interdimensional, that only by engaging with the Qliphothic realms could we become more than what we are. He believed that the alien is not out there. It is buried in the deepest layers of our DNA, sleeping in the black folds of our unconscious, waiting for a spark. The rituals of the Typhonian tradition are that spark. They awaken the alien within. The magician who survives the tunnels is not merely a practitioner of magic. They are a hybrid, a node in a cosmic network that stretches far beyond earth or heaven. And the price of this knowledge is not paid in blood, but in sanity. Because once you see the eyes watching from behind the veil, you can never unsee them. You realize the stars are not distant. They are holes, and something is looking through. The Qliphoth are not what they seem. They are not demonic prisons. They are bridges. They are invitations. They are tests, and those who answer must be willing to lose themselves entirely to find what waits on the other side.
He does not arrive with horns or cloven hooves. There is no stench of sulfur, no flames licking at the edges of reality. Instead, he appears in silence, in the flicker of a candle, in a still room, in the electric shiver down the spine when a forbidden book is opened, in the voice that whispers, "What if everything you were taught was a lie?" Lucifer, the light bearer, is not the devil of Sunday sermons, not in the path we now walk. Here, among those who dare tread beyond the tree of life, beyond even the Qliphoth, he is the fire in the marrow of rebellion, the archetype of liberated intellect, of divine spark, unchained by heaven's law. In Luciferianism, he is not worshipped, but emulated, not a god, but a principle of inner sovereignty, of forbidden wisdom, of the will to ascend, not through obedience, but through the mastery of shadow. This path does not ask for prayers. It demands blood, not spilled in sacrifice, but in the form of inner struggle, the cutting away of inherited morality, the breaking of chains forged by dogma. And it begins with a question that echoes like thunder in the soul. What if good and evil are illusions, crafted to bind the will? In ancient texts, hidden from the eyes of the faithful, Lucifer was never cast as merely evil. He was the morning star, the shining one, the angel who refused to kneel, not out of pride alone, but from the recognition of a greater truth, that servitude, even in paradise, is still a cage. In Gnostic traditions, the demiurge, creator of the flawed material world, is the true deceiver, and the serpent in Eden, often identified with Lucifer, is the liberator, the bringer of gnosis, the light that shatters ignorance. To eat from the tree of knowledge was not sin. It was the first act of awakening. In this view, Lucifer did not fall. He descended willingly, as Prometheus descended to give fire to man, knowing he would suffer for it, as all initiates must descend through darkness to emerge transformed. In this light, Luciferianism is not Satanism in its sensationalist modern forms. It is a path of internal alchemy, where the seeker becomes both crucible and flame. Its rituals do not beg favor from gods. They awaken the god within. They awaken the god within. The adept who walks the Luciferian path learns to silence the inherited voice of fear, to question the binaries of sacred and profane. They do not blaspheme for shock, but for clarity, to break open the sealed doors of perception, to expose the machine of control that is morality dictated by external law. For in the Qliphothic view, evil is not a cosmic force, but an imbalance, a distortion of divine principle, and the will, when pure and undivided, can pass through those distortions and reshape them. This is the Luciferian will, not brute force, but refined focus,
a sovereignty so complete that it no longer fears judgment. The black flame is its symbol, the fire that burns without consuming, the light that shines in darkness and knows its origin. In the grimoires of old, certain names were whispered alongside Lucifer's: Azazel, Samael, Lilith, figures cast out by divine decree, but venerated in hidden rites, not as demons, but as bearers of forgotten truth. Each represented a facet of the Luciferian archetype: Azazel, the teacher of weaponry and sorcery; Lilith, the embodiment of untamed sexuality and independence; Samael, the venomous archangel who administers divine wrath. They are the shadows of suppressed power, energies exiled by dogmatic theologies, now reclaimed by the magician who dares descend into the tree of death. In the Luciferian's view, hell is not a punishment, it is the crucible where the soul is stripped of illusion, and heaven, it is the golden cage where will dies in the comfort of blind obedience. Luciferianism does not seek damnation nor salvation, it transcends both. It is the path of the self-deified. The rituals are often stark, personal, and imbued with symbolism that the orthodox fear. The mirror becomes an altar, not to reflect vanity, but to confront the self in its totality. The pentagram is not merely a symbol of the elements, but a key, a geometry of dominion over self and world. The serpent, once cursed to crawl, now coils around the spine of the adept, awakening the sleeping fires of the Kundalini, unlocking perception layer by layer. Luciferian practitioners draw from many streams: Hermeticism, Kabbalah, Tantra, alchemy, recombining them in a synthesis that dissolves hierarchy and grants agency. There are no priests, only paths; no commandments, only consequences. In the writings of Michael W. Ford, a modern architect of Luciferian thought, we find the recurring principle of apotheosis, the ascent of man through the shadow. He writes not to flatter the ego, but to awaken the dragon within it. He speaks of Lucifer as the demonic masculine, Lilith as the demonic feminine, and the merging of both as the black alchemical wedding. It is not gendered, but archetypal, a union of logic and passion, will and desire, intellect and instinct. This wedding takes place within, and from it is born a being no longer human in the conventional sense, but mythic, the adversary, not of God, but of ignorance, of stagnation. In the Luciferian path, knowledge is sacred, but only if it burns, only if it wounds, only if it transforms. The adept must not only read the ancient tomes, but risk becoming them. To walk with Lucifer is to enter the fire of knowing and come out changed. But this path is not without danger, for those who approach it seeking power without purpose, who use its sigils to dominate rather than liberate, find themselves consumed, not by Lucifer, but by their own shadow, inflated and uncontrolled. The will must be tempered by insight, desire must be wielded with discipline, and above all, the seeker must be ready to confront the abyss, not as an enemy, but as a teacher. Carl Jung, though not an occultist, touched upon this in his writings on the shadow. He warned that the integration of the unconscious requires immense courage, for what is found there may not be flattering. The Luciferian knows this, and still goes forward, still descends, still asks the forbidden questions, for in every forbidden book, in every burned grimoire, in every heretic scream, there is a seed of truth, choked by dogma, silenced by fear, waiting for one brave enough to resurrect it. Luciferianism is that resurrection. It is not a cult of personality, nor a rebellion for its own sake. It is an alignment with the current of conscious evolution, through will, through wisdom, through the mastery of both light and shadow. In its most sublime expression, it is the refusal to bow before external thrones, and the recognition that the only true temple is the self fortified by truth, lit by the black flame, and crowned not with gold, but with knowing.
The adept who walks this path walks alone, but not in isolation, for through the cliffothic tunnels, through the forgotten names, through the gnosis of ancient stars, they find their kin, not in blood, but in fire, not in creed, but in will. And when they stand at the edge of what is known, gazing into the chaos beyond, they do not tremble, they open their arms, for Lucifer walks not before or behind, but within.
The air thickens as one descends deeper into the labyrinth of hidden knowledge. No longer does the seeker walk paths marked by archetypes alone. Here, the darkness becomes personal. It breathes. It speaks. The shadows wear faces. The intellect's safe distance dissolves. And what once were metaphors of imbalance now reach out with ancient will. This is the domain of theistic Satanism, a realm where the Qliphoth is not just studied, but inhabited, not as theory, but as living current. In this path, the demonic is not a mere psychological projection or an occult symbol. It is real, it is alive, and it teaches, unlike Luciferianism, which exalts the self as God and views darkness as an inner process. Theistic Satanism embraces the existence of external, conscious entities, beings cast beyond the veils of the Sephiroth, not as villains of myth, but as primordial intelligences, older than civilization, watching from the edges of awareness. These are not the grotesque monsters of medieval paintings. They are spirits of flame and shadow, lords of forgotten kingdoms, guides for those who no longer tremble before the sacred. Each Qlipha becomes not just a realm to explore, but a temple where a being waits, ancient, knowing, and dangerous. In the realm of Tamil, one meets not a philosophical paradox, but duality incarnate, Satan and Moloch, locked in eternal struggle, representing the tearing force of will against will. Those who invoke them report visions of apocalyptic grandeur, of celestial cities burning, of golden thrones split by obsidian swords, not hallucinations, but initiations. The mind cannot fabricate such depth. It is experienced viscerally, through dreams, through trance, through rites that defy language. In Gargiel, the cold intellect becomes Samael himself, the poison of God, a presence that teaches, through riddles and riddles within riddles, deconstructing logic, until the ego shatters and is rebuilt with sharper clarity. His whisper is precise, sterile, cutting. Those who invoke him often speak of feeling, as though their thoughts were being rewritten from within, as if a more ancient intelligence had taken the reins to recalibrate perception. Setarael, the concealer, is said to manifest as a shrouded queen, sometimes called Lucifuge's bride, sometimes nameless. She unravels the concept of clarity, showing the initiate how truth is often found in layers of lies, and how those lies can be tools of transcendence. One does not see her face, only the outline, only the presence that dances just beyond recognition. Her voice sounds like one's own thoughts, but laden with knowledge never before studied. In Gamchikoth, the suffocating caregiver appears not as comfort, but as Lilith, not the seductive archetype of rebellion, but the mother who devours her children to save them from corruption. A paradox, a lesson. Those who engage her energy describe overwhelming emotional storms, a sense of drowning in one's own desire for safety, followed by the brutal revelation that liberation often wears the mask of betrayal. Each demonic teacher presents the sphere not just as a domain to explore, but as a wound to reopen, a mirror to face. The sphere of Golakab burns, not with physical fire, but with the inner blaze of wrath,
held too long, of boundaries crossed without defense. The demon Asmodeus, often associated with this realm, appears not as the lecherous caricature from folklore, but as a radiant horned being, of red gold fire, whose lesson is the sacredness of rage, and its purification into power. He teaches how to transmute destruction into will, how to let the fire cleanse but not consume. In Tigerian, the solar shell of false light, the adept meets Belphegor, or Surath, radiant, charismatic, intoxicating. The experience is that of being worshipped, of seeing oneself as a god before having earned it. And then, the fall, the mask of enlightenment is torn away, and the initiate must confront their narcissism, their craving for adoration, their hunger for a crown made of glass. These demons do not flatter, they do not comfort, they test, break, and reform. In theistic Satanism, the relationship is not transactional, it is pact-bound, it is communion, it is apprenticeship. The rituals vary among traditions, but often include invocation, blood seals, trance work, and symbolic offerings, not of harm to others, but of sacrifice from the self, sleep, fear, comfort, ignorance. The demons demand presence, not worship, but respect, not submission, but sincerity, and they offer in return, not empty promises, but transformation. Those who walk this path long enough begin to sense that the veil between worlds thins. Dreams become initiatory realms. Synchronicities unfold with terrifying precision. Gishrov inti, but disdrowning precision. A voice may call in the middle of night, not from outside, but from within the bones, and it always knows your name. There are many orders and covens that practice theistic Satanism in secrecy, ranging from traditional demonolators, who draw from grimoires, such as the Lesser Key of Solomon, to modern practitioners of the Temple of the Ascending Flame, or the Order of Phosphorus. Some are eclectic, blending Kabbalah, Sumerian myth, and modern chaos magic. Others follow strict initiatory systems where each Khalifah must be entered through months of ritual and introspection. In the writings of S. Connolly, one of the most respected voices in modern demonolatry, the demons are not evil, but divine intelligences with unique currents. She warns against casual invocation, insisting that demons respond best to truth and intent, and that dishonesty or disrespect will not be ignored. In this path, each Khalifah is not a concept, but a temple, alive, vibrating, resonating with a current older than monotheism. The Caliphate is not just a map of imbalance, but a cathedral of flame, where each hall holds a master. The path is not linear. One may be drawn to a sphere that reflects an inner wound, or called by a name, whispered in dreams. The journey is tailored by the demons themselves, who choose their students with a precision beyond human logic. But the ultimate goal is not damnation. It is not chaos for its own sake. It is gnosis, a knowing that penetrates bone, that burns away illusion, that forges the soul into something unrecognizable to the old self. Theistic Satanism challenges the binary of good and evil more fiercely than any other path. It requires the adept to question why certain gods were deemed holy and others profane, why some knowledge was preserved and other truths burned. It asks, what if the demons are the first teachers, not the last tempters? What if Eden's serpent was not a deceiver, but a guardian? The answer is not given, it must be lived. The demons do not speak in riddles unless the student hides from truth. They do not appear in monstrous forms unless fear clouds perception. What they show is what the initiate brings. They mirror the inner abyss. They do not punish, but they do reveal, and few can endure revelation without being undone. Yet those who survive, who walk through all 10 colophothic realms and emerge on the other side, do not return as they were. They carry new names. They speak in symbols. Their eyes shine with a knowing that cannot be explained. They have not escaped the world. They have learned to command it, not through dominance, but through resonance. They no longer fear darkness, for it has become their teacher, their crucible, their guide, and in the silence of ritual, when the flame flickers low and the air stills, they hear the voice of the demon, not as a scream, not as a roar, but as a whisper. You were never lost, only asleep, and now you are awake.
The map dissolves, the system crumbles, and in the ashes of doctrine, something stranger arises. A path with no name, no keys, no gates, just will, just imagination, just raw, shifting force. This is where chaos magic begins, not with candles or ancient words, but with the sacred realization that belief itself is the spell, and symbols are only as powerful as the minds that dare to use them. The Qliphoth, once depicted in careful geometric precision, here becomes fluid, a mirror reflecting only the chaos of the practitioner's own depths. No two paths are the same. No two trees of death are identical, because in chaos magic, the abyss isn't charted, it's sculpted. In this world, there are no masters, only magicians, no commandments, only experiments. The 10 spheres of the Qliphoth are not mandatory stations, they are archetypal echoes, subject to mutation. One chaos magician may experience Gamchikoth, not as suffocating love, but as corporate servitude. Another may walk through Golachab and feel not rage, but repressed creative genius. The forms twist based on psyche, culture, memory, and shadow. Chaos magic does not seek a universal truth. It unveils individual gnosis, personal, unstable, authentic, and that is why it terrifies the keepers of order. The origins of chaos magic trace back to the late 20th century, in the underground scenes of London and Leeds, where magicians like Peter J. Carroll and Ray Sherwin began dismantling traditional ceremonial frameworks. Their work, compiled in texts like Liber Null and Psychonaut, emphasized results over rituals and personal mythology over inherited dogma. They proposed that belief is a tool to be adopted and discarded at will, that symbols, no matter how ancient, hold no power unless activated by intent, and that the Qliphoth, like any metaphysical structure, can be rewritten, broken, remade, absorbed. To a chaos magician, the tree of death is not an objective architecture, but a living diagram of their inner wounds and transformations. One might map their trauma, addiction, shame, lust, rebellion, and awakening onto the spheres. Another might conjure completely new shells, beyond the 10, naming them with personal code or dreamborn words. The map grows with the magician. It may contradict traditional Kabbalah. It may even seem blasphemous, but within the systemless system of chaos, that contradiction is the point. Creation is not imitation, it is act. Chaos ritual looks nothing like traditional invocation. A rite may include a sigil drawn in chalk and burned, a trance induced by strobe light and industrial music, a meditation using video game soundtracks and fictional characters as spirits. The gods of chaos magic are fluid: Yog-Sothoth, Batman, Kali, an ex-lover, or a neuron. The only rule is relevance. The only dogma is freedom. And yet, within this seeming absurdity, something profound occurs. Results. Practitioners report real shifts, psychological integration, synchronicities, awakenings, transformations, as concrete as any occult initiation. The Qliphoth, in chaos magic, becomes a dreamscape, a psychological machine, each shell a trigger for descent and healing. For example,
A magician confronting Kagirian might draw a personal sigil representing narcissistic wounds, perhaps an emblem made from childhood drawings or social media avatars, and then destroy it in ritual, releasing the craving for external validation. In this sense, each shell becomes a psycho-magical operation, customized and enacted in real time. The power lies not in the name of the shell, but in the emotional voltage attached to it. Some chaos magicians document their Qliphothic journeys like dream diaries, building a personal grimoire of descent. Others reject documentation altogether, letting the transformation occur purely in the moment. Practices vary, but the underlying current remains: descent through shadow, ascent through authenticity. The tree of death is not just a map of evil, nor even of imbalance. It becomes the skeletal X-ray of the magician's own inner architecture, a map of what was hidden, a record of what was denied, a blueprint of power reforged. Kenneth Grant, though not a chaos magician per se, influenced this current deeply. His Typhonian writings spoke of the Qliphoth as zones of consciousness beyond human logic, where alien forces whisper and mutate reality. Chaos magicians borrowed this language, merging Grant's interdimensional Qliphoth with the adaptability of postmodern ritual. The result: experiential universes where demonic spheres became portals, not to theological evil, but to raw unconscious content, sexual, violent, divine, absurd. Nothing was off limits, nothing was sacred, except transformation. Even contemporary psychology nods toward this chaos. Jung's shadow work mirrors the descent into Gamaliel. Existential therapy echoes the confrontation with Tamiel. In a world increasingly aware of trauma, fragmentation, multiplicity of identity, chaos magic offers not a cure, but a mirror. The tree of death becomes the mind's forbidden garden. Each sphere, a repressed archetype. Each rite, a cathartic purge. And the magician, not a priest, not a scholar, but an artist of belief, of pain, of transcendence. Technology, too, is now part of the ritual. Sigils generated through AI, Qliphothic meditations layered over binaural beats, online covens meeting under encrypted names, swapping dreams like keys to invisible temples. The Qliphoth evolves because chaos demands evolution, and through it, the magician learns that even the darkest shells can contain light, not borrowed light from divine Sephiroth, but new light, born from descent. From the cracks of the shattered vessels, something luminous emerges, not purity, but integration. In the end, chaos magic asks no loyalty. It burns its own books, it invites heresy, it thrives in ambiguity, and for that reason, it attracts those who are tired of being told what truth is. It is not for everyone, it is not safe, but it is real, and for those who dare to sculpt their own tree of death, the reward is not salvation, but sovereignty.
The road forks in the desert of initiation. On the right, the light blinds with its comfort, union, surrender, transcendence. On the left, shadows stretch long and silent, promising nothing, demanding everything. This is the path, less traveled, the path where angels fear to tread. The left-hand path does not lead upward, but inward. It does not promise heaven, but the confrontation of one's own abyss. It does not culminate in union with God, but in the rediscovery of something older, the true self, stripped of masks, myths, and mirrors. In the oldest esoteric texts, the left-hand path was never about evil. It was about refusal to dissolve into the divine, refusal to let the self be devoured by cosmic oneness. In the tantric traditions of India, the Varmakara, literally the left-handed way, involved forbidden rites, cremation grounds, offerings of flesh, intoxicants, rituals that defied caste and purity laws. But these were not mere acts of rebellion. They were technologies of liberation, designed to break societal illusions and confront the primal energies within. Enlightenment not by denial, but by transgression. awakening not by escape, but by descent. In the West, the left-hand path, emerged in the margins, feared, whispered about, often distorted, yet its thread runs through alchemy, where nigredo, the blackening, is the necessary death before the gold. It appears in the cliff-off, where each shell challenges not the weak, but the seeker of power, willing to face fragmentation without flinching. It speaks in the voice of Prometheus, stealing fire, Lucifer bringing forbidden knowledge, Lilith rejecting submission. These are not demons of destruction. They are archetypes of individuation. Carl Jung touched this unknowingly when he explored the shadow, the repressed, denied, unaccepted aspects of the psyche. To integrate the shadow, one must enter the underworld of the self, and that is what the left-hand path demands. Not worship, not obedience, but ruthless honesty. You must look at what you fear. You must walk toward what you despise. You must embrace what the world told you to bury. Because in that confrontation lies the key to real transformation, not sanctification, but sovereignty. The adepts of this path do not wear robes. They do not chant to ascend. They descend. They descend into pain, addiction, rage, lust, guilt, not to indulge it, but to master it. They map their own hells. They name their own daemons, and in doing so, they tear away the illusions of external salvation. There is no savior here, only the self, and that is the most terrifying and liberating truth of all. In Luciferian thought, the left-hand path is the fire of will. It is the sacred rebellion against imposed morality. It teaches that man becomes divine, not by kneeling, but by creating, by challenging, by becoming. Michael W. Ford, a modern Luciferian, speaks of apotheosis, the transformation of the self into a god through knowledge, discipline, and will, not worshipping darkness, but using it as a mirror, not escaping suffering, but using it as fuel. The Temple of Set, a left-hand path order founded by Michael Aquino, defines its central concept as Ixpa, an ancient Egyptian word, meaning, I have come into being. It is the crystallization of consciousness, the birth of self-awareness, through isolation, introspection, and evolution. The Setian does not seek to dissolve into a higher power, but to strengthen the uniqueness of their being, endlessly becoming, never surrendering. This idea, that the sacred lies not in conformity, but in divergence, is what terrifies orthodoxy. The left-hand path does not ask for consensus. It does not want a following. It demands that each seeker become their own law, and in doing so, it births minds that cannot be ruled, because they have already faced their own darkness and emerged whole. Even chaos magic borrows from this, when it tells the practitioner to create their own system, their own demons, their own tree. That is individuation. That is self-deification. When a magician walks the cliff off and sees not cosmic evil, but personal trauma turned into power, that is the left-hand path, wrapped in the language of postmodern myth. But make no mistake, this is not safe. This is not therapeutic. This is alchemy. It burns away illusions with slow, merciless precision. The trials are real. Depression, obsession, isolation, the madness that comes when you remove all gods and find yourself staring into a mirror you can no longer look away from. But if you endure, if you stay, something extraordinary happens. The fragmented self, the exiled pieces, the devoured archetypes, they begin to return, not pure, not innocent, but whole and powerful. This is the secret the world fears, that the path of darkness leads not to destruction, but to illumination, a different kind of light, forged in the underworld, cold and sharp, like obsidian, a light that does not blind, but reveals. The left-hand path is not for everyone. It is not a religion. It is not a movement. It is a mirror.
And what you see in that mirror, that is your truth, not the truth, yours. In the end, the goal is not to become a saint, it is to become real, to strip away every borrowed belief, every societal scar, every fear-drenched thought, until what remains is you, raw, sovereign, awake, not kneeling before any god, but looking them in the eye. That is the left-hand path, that is individuation through darkness, and that is why it must remain hidden, not because it is evil, but because it is free.
There is a mistake many make when they peer into the shadows. They believe that the darkness is the destination, that to walk the left-hand path is to become consumed by it. But those who understand its true essence know the opposite is true. The descent is only the beginning. The underworld is not a prison. It is a forge, and the goal is not purification through rejection of darkness, but the transmutation of the self by embracing it, to be reforged, not sanctified, to be whole, not pure. Shadow integration is not a poetic metaphor. It is the central crucible of occult initiation. Ancient mystery schools didn't fear the chthonic. They invoked it, from the Eleusinian rites of Demeter and Persephone to the death and rebirth trials of the Mithraic chambers. Initiates confronted the darkest parts of existence: fear, death, loss, rage, the unknown, because only by facing those forces could the soul be remade. Modern psychology would later echo these truths, stripped of their sacred language. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, a process of becoming whole by reconciling the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche. But long before the language of therapy, mystics knew that to ascend truly, one had to first descend willingly. The Qliphoth, in this light, are not infernal realms to be banished. They are the echoes of a shattering, remnants of divine potential that lost their balance. They mirror not demonic forces in the Hollywood sense, but internal archetypes that, when denied, become monstrous. Each shell contains a fragment of the self, a buried desire, a forgotten pain, a repressed truth, and when ignored, these fragments rot and fester, but when engaged, when seen without fear or condemnation, they begin to transmute. The rage becomes drive, the lust becomes passion, the chaos becomes creativity, the fear becomes insight, the darkness reveals the gold hidden within. The ancient alchemists encoded this in every stage of their work. First came nigredo, the blackening, the rot, the putrefaction. It was not a flaw in the process. It was the necessary start. Only after decomposition could the albedo begin, the whitening, the clarification, and then the rubedo, the reddening, the final union, the rebirth of a new, whole self. The philosopher's stone was never simply a tool to turn lead into gold. It was the symbol of a soul that had embraced every aspect of its being and emerged indestructible. In mystical Kabbalah, the Sephiroth and the Qliphoth are reflections of one another. You cannot climb the tree of life without encountering its shadow. To aspire toward Kita, the crown, without first wrestling with Tamiel, the divided crown, is to ascend without foundation, and the danger of such an ascent is arrogance, fragility, spiritual bypassing. True growth demands roots that grip even the dark soil of the soul. The reforging process begins when the initiate stops fleeing, when they cease casting blame outward and instead turn inward, into the caverns where childhood wounds, ancestral traumas, generational shadows, and personal fears dwell. This is where the real magic happens, not in spells or rituals for control, but in sitting with what terrifies, shames, or enrages you, and refusing to look away. Not as punishment, as initiation. Modern esoteric systems such as the Typhonian tradition speak of these confrontations not as fantasies, but as experiences, as real,
as any vision or invocation. When Kenneth Grant wrote of the tunnels of Set, paths beneath the cliff oath, he spoke not of demons, but of alien intelligences that existed in the outer spaces of mind and cosmos. Whether interpreted literally or symbolically, these tunnels represent the paths we must walk to reclaim what we have lost in the fragmentation of consciousness. Even contemporary psychological practitioners who delve into trauma recovery describe a similar architecture: buried parts of the psyche, dissociated aspects of identity, emotional complexes that act like separate beings within the mind. These inner demons, so to speak, can't be slain. They must be heard. Their stories must be integrated, and in doing so, a new kind of soul emerges, not one that pretends it has no darkness, but one that holds it, understands it, and no longer fears it. This is not an easy process. It is a crucifixion of ego, a descent into silence, a letting go of who you thought you were. It is losing your identity, so that something deeper can rise, and what rises is not pure light. It is the alloy of everything you've been through, the scars, the dreams, the betrayals, the ecstasies, and it is strong, it is real, it cannot be controlled because it is already whole. Some traditions speak of this emergence as the birth of the magus, others call it the black sun, a light born within the darkness. Some experience it as the awakening of the daemon, the higher self that had been veiled behind illusions. But all speak of the same thing, a being who has looked into the abyss and claimed it, not as an enemy, but as a lost part of themselves, a soul not shattered, but reforged in its own fire. This is the final heresy, that darkness is not evil, that pain is not to be erased, that the soul's journey is not about returning to innocence, but about walking through experience with open eyes and an open will, and emerging from it not cleansed, but crowned. The true initiate does not glow with the light of borrowed holiness. They carry within them a quiet storm, a stillness forged by walking through their own inferno and not being burned. They do not preach, they do not convert, they simply are. And in their presence, others feel something they cannot name, a sense of gravity, of presence, of being seen without judgment. Because this soul has seen all of themselves, and they have not turned away. This is the mystery of the left-hand path, that in the descent you rise, that in claiming your darkness, you illuminate, that in becoming whole, you become divine, not because you are perfect, but because you are real. And those who walk this road, quietly, without followers, without dogma, with only the fire of will in their chest, they do not remain in the shadows. They become the light that was never taught, never given, never borrowed, a light born in the underworld, pulsing with every truth the world tried to bury.